Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great today. I'm just about to change over to my new system, so I'm really excited for that because literally every single thing, whether it was software or hardware virtually, all seems to have failed on me at the exact same time. Even down to recording this right now. I went to play back a version I just did, the first one, and I can't hear myself back for some reason. But a nice recording because I can see like the blue on the screen where my voice is, so hopefully it's come out normal. It'd be funny if it was distorted because I won't be able to realise until I've actually saved the video, but that's for later on. Now before this starts, I'd like to share something that I think can help people. So when dealing with your own internal battles or mental illnesses, it can be an easy trap to fall into where you compare yourself to others and you might not understand why other people seem to not have anxiety but you do, and then it makes you feel bad. But you have to not care about what anybody else is doing and not make any comparisons to others. You can only ever be yourself, and the other people aren't going to be able to make you feel better if you watch them and think, oh, why are they not anxious, for example, why am I? The most important thing to do is to get help for it. Because I knew for a while when I didn't know what my anxiety was, I used to wonder why everybody else seemed to be able to get on fine, but I should have just been focusing on myself and getting better, and it turned out doing the comparisons was actually making me feel far worse, so it's the thought I think can hopefully help some people. And the other thing too is it's okay to have bad days with your mental health or your internal battles. They're going to happen, it's fine. Don't put too much pressure on yourself or make yourself feel bad if you think, for example, oh, my target's not to have any anxious days, and if they happen, it's fine. Don't beat yourself up over things because they're gonna happen. So hopefully that can make a difference for some people. And there is more I'd like to say, but I literally can't hear myself back, so it's gonna be really difficult and everything's in one take at the minute. And for some reason my current editing software cut out half of the stories I recorded for this video. So what I've done is I've added the new stories that have actually survived my computer onto the last one as a compilation. So if you haven't heard my previous video, then go ahead and watch all of this. If not, I'll put it in the timestamps in the bottom where you can stop listening if you only want to hear new ones. But of course, if you just want to listen to it all, then go for it. So I hope everybody's doing great and enjoys these stories. Take care, I'll speak to you all soon. Now I was very fortunate that my parents owned a property in a very beautiful area. We had miles and miles of woodlands around us, and I don't know, I just fell in love with the place growing up. I actually still live very close to there today. It's only about half an hour away. Now during some summers, or preferably in the winter, I could actually go to the small property that they owned, deep in the middle of nowhere. The property in question was kind of like a cabin, but I'm hesitant to call it that because of the scale of it. It was more like a house, but technically not classed as one, if that makes sense. Now, honestly, the best memories I have was being out there on my own. All I needed was a radio for company. I'm not talking about the walkie-talkie one, just the one that you can actually turn on to listen to music. With lots of good memories there was very few bad ones, but there was one experience that I wanted to share with you all today. Now during the winter in question, it was a particularly harsh one. Not that that bothered me too much, because like I said, I love being out there, but you had to be careful not to be caught out at night because of the frostbite or hypothermia that could very quickly take over. One issue I would find is that when you were numb to the cold, you wouldn't really feel your extremities going dodgy. For example, my dad got frostbite really bad on his toes once and actually had to have one of his toes amputated because of it, but at the time he thought he was completely fine. That was until he got home and took his socks off. But to my main story now. During one of these particular winters, I was staying there on my own and having a grand old time as always. The snow wasn't too bad really. It was enough that You'd feel quite cold if you stepped out in it, but not too bad. The trees look beautiful too. What I loved about this particular area is that some of the trees you could actually see through because they didn't have any leaves on them, but others were thick and dense and it looked really picturesque. What I loved more than the trees was walking next to the streams that would flow. Those were the ones that hadn't froze over yet. I don't know, I just thought it looked so beautiful. I honestly can't get over how nice winter is. So in this day in question, it's about midday heading towards the evening when I head out. I say evening because it got dark very quick, but it was only about 5 or so at the time. Now as I'm walking through the path that I would usually take, I realised that nobody else has been here for a long time. I say that because there hasn't been much snowfall now, and there's no footprints other than my own. I look around and I just really think I'm so blessed to be able to live somewhere like this, which is truly beautiful and picturesque. Not a lot of people get to experience things like this as often as I do. There was some sunlight coming through the trees now, so I decided to put on my shades. A lot of people won't realise unless you live out here. Snow can actually be worse than a summer's day for your eyes, because when the snow is fresh set and not really disturbed or pure, it can reflect light massively and give you headaches. One of these headaches was coming on for me now. So the shades go on and off I go. I'm following the stream now because I think it's truly beautiful. I enjoy my walk and decide I'm going to go off for about a couple of hours and just loop back round again. This was before the time that you really had phones, so I was just keeping myself company with my thoughts, something that I often did and enjoyed. As I was walking, I had a strange feeling in my body, like I would suddenly become very warm. It's hard to describe, but it's almost like somebody turned up the thermometer inside my body too warm. I don't know, it kind of freaked me out, man. Like, it felt kind of like I was going to collapse almost, but not at the same time, if that makes sense. I decided I probably got too much on and slowed the pace a bit, because of course your heart rate is going to rise naturally the further you go. I continue through into a more dense part of the forest now. Up ahead of me I can see some logs laying on the road. Well, I call it a road, but it's more of a path, but that was my nickname for it because it was wider than the other paths. I think this is quite strange because it seems like they've fallen very recently. There actually isn't snow covering the bottom of them, which I think's really odd. It literally looks like something's come along, pushed one over and kept going. I look around to see if there's any tracks or anything because god, I really don't want to run into whatever this is. But there's nada. I continue forward and have to go across a log over the stream now. I'm very cautious of this and laughing because I fell in these before and it's very dangerous. It's not funny, but it kind of is to me. I don't know, I guess you make up your own fun on these adventures. I decide I should probably start looping back the other way now, but something was just drawing me into the forest even deeper. Now I can finally see some tracks next to me, and they look really strange. They're almost like giant hoofs, kind of like what a moose would make, but different I guess, and I know there was no moose in this area. It was odd, they just seemed to appear out of nowhere and disappear just like that. There was only about 6 of them, but I thought this was really strange. I thought, it's almost like a giant bird has gone and captured something that just appeared. I continue on my way and I notice there's a lot more trees that have been knocked over here. I actually get a little bit worried now because I know for a fact that they shouldn't be like this. And why is there no other signs of life? I decide not to worry too much and just pick up the pace a bit. I'm no longer worried about being too warm now and decide that I really just need to get back home. I look off to the side and I can see a tree that's collapsed, and this one's big. It almost looks like somebody's done it on purpose to live there. And I might be wrong, but I can see some very faint pinkish colour in the snow next to it. I'm convinced now there's been a large animal here, and as you can imagine, I don't want to be out here and have to fight whatever this is. I have a very small knife on me, but hey, that's not going to do much against some of the animals you get out here. I decide not to investigate the tree that's fallen and keep going. Now I can't describe the feeling, but it was almost like I was stepping into a new unmarked part of the forest that I was in but wasn't my own, if that makes sense. Almost like I've stepped into somebody else's world. The trees seemed much more intimidating now and larger than life almost. This is odd because I've lived out here my entire life and never really had this feeling before. I decide to stop for a second and there's silence. I mean, this is perfectly normal out here, but it just felt different this time. I look around again and there's some more tracks again in the snow. Just the same as before, strange hoof markings, but this time they're in a single file. I think this is odd because most animals actually have two pairs at the same time, and you can normally see the difference with this, but in this case you can't. I think this is really odd, laughing, thinking it's probably an animal that's only got one leg hopping along, because that's exactly what it looks like. Again, I think this is really bizarre, but I must go forward. I don't actually check the direction of these tracks too. I decide to do a light jog just to try and beat the sunlight, and as I'm doing so, I can hear a strange trailing sound off to the side of where I'm standing. I think this is really strange because, again, there was silence up until this point, but I decide to keep going further. Now, God, I was stupid. I'd been out here in the dark now, and if you've ever been in a forest before at night, it's pretty much impossible to navigate. Everything looks exactly the same, and snow can actually pick up and block in where you've come from, so it's not like you can follow your own tracks. Luckily for me, I actually know the direction I have to go in now, and kind of look back to where I was, knowing the direction I come from. Now what I find really odd is that I can see my footprints, but accompanied by the hoofs again in a single file next to me. Now I look behind me and I realise no animal's been tracking me, but it seems really odd. They're at the rough same depth as my own footprints, and for those of you who don't know what that means, basically there's not been any snowfall that's changed the depth between both of ours, so it must have occurred at roughly the same time, but nothing's here. I think maybe it's a hungry animal that thinks I have food I can leave for it. Well, I'm gonna treat it today. I have a protein bar in my pocket and I throw it off to the side. That was dumb. I go and pick it up and break it off more, throwing them in all directions. I don't know what animal this is, but I know for a fact that I don't want it to follow me. I feel a little more safe as I come back closer to where I know I can get back home. Just as I'm making my way forward, there's a strange knocking sound on the tree. It sounds very heavy, almost like it's too loud to be a person that's made the sound. I mean, even with a hammer, it's more like a powerful thud that doesn't make sense. I turn back and I see movement. I can't believe what I'm seeing though. A tree falls just maybe 20 feet from where I was standing. There was nothing around it to make it fall though. And then, a creaking sound, a snap, and a loud thud. This time I feel the ground vibrate next to me. What the hell was that? Another tree falls just next to me. It literally looks like something's leaning on them, pushing them over, but it isn't. Nothing is. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I had to get out of there, so I quickly do a jog. As I start jogging again, I realise that I need to look over my shoulder, but I'm too scared to, deciding I must press on for as far as possible, then stopping to look around. I eventually make it up to a really nice clearing, and I feel safe again. I decide to clear the snow off of a rock and sit down, doing so to make sure I don't get wet. I'm not that far from home now, but I don't know, curiosity gets the better of me. I let out a large hey to see if anybody can hear me or anyone's in there playing games on me, but there's no reply. Dang, I was certain I'd cracked it. It was some stupid kids or loggers who didn't know I was there. Really odd. I decide to walk out into the clearing more now. I can actually see for quite a long way around me at this point, so I'm not really too worried being here. I hear it again though. That familiar sound of a tree falling. I say, God, what now? And just off in the distance, a tree falls. It's quite far away from me, but it was unmistakable. I go, what the hell is happening? An earthquake? It's not possible. Why is this? As I'm standing there, I hear the same again, this time very close to me. I decide that this time I'm going to be brave. Well, by brave I mean standing out of the way from the trees, but I can't believe what I'm seeing. Another tree crashes down just in front of me. I'm pretty sure that I've lost my mind now. I look down and look at my hands, deciding to hit the back of my hand to see if I'm in a dream or not. Nope, I'm not. I can suddenly feel a piercing feeling though in the distance. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but something just feels really odd, and that's when I notice it. Just in the slight darkness of the forest, I can see eyes staring back at me. Now it really looks like a large animal crouching down, but something's different this time. The eyes are red. Not blood red, but just red. It's really strange. I've rubbed my eyes for a second and the thing was still there. No more trees are falling now, but something is very off. Never in my life have I ever seen anything like this. It's honestly like I'm in a dream or movie, but not a good one. One where the ending's bad for the main character. I look around to see if there's anything else, but nothing. Now whatever this thing is has gone. Now I'm met with two options. I can either go back from the way that I've come, or go the opposite direction to where the trees are falling. I decide I should go to the opposite direction and get to the trees. I think it's safer to be away from this thing, and I start sprinting along in the snow. I have to be careful because there's lots of rocks and things on the floor, and I'm quite clumsy at the best of times, so I'm trying my best to be careful here and not get hurt. I have to capture my breath again because if you live in an area where you've never been in snow and ran in it before, it's actually an extremely difficult thing to do. So I have to stop to capture my breath, and I look around, relieved that everything seems to have gone back to normal. I start walking again now, trying to get to the other side back to civilization. I look over my shoulder and there it is again. Eyes following me. Whatever this thing is has definitely got closer to where I am now. Now I don't know whether it's somebody with torches or something messing around with me, but it seems extremely improbable at this point. The strangest thing too is that it doesn't blink once, which makes me think it wasn't some kind of animal. Again, I must press on now. I make it even further along before I have to stop again. I look down to my side and to my horror, the hoof marks have followed me again. Single file, but I've realised this thing is much bigger than I am. I have size 13 feet and this is at least 2 or 3 inches bigger than my own shoe print. How the hell did this appear? What the hell is happening? I feel almost embarrassed to say it, but I panicked now. I don't remember how long it took or how it happened, but the next thing I can remember is me sprinting. I sprint back to the start of where civilization should be and across a small bridge. I slip initially and luckily catch myself on one of the wooden pillars at the side. I could have been in a world of hurt or probably died if I'd slipped through into the ice because not only the cold, but there would be no help here. I look back and there's some movement again. It just looks like a black mass. Now, I can't say for sure at this point whether it wasn't a jogger or not, and I confuse the two, but as you can imagine, I kept going. I just hoped it wasn't a random jogger who was going to be attacked by whatever that thing was. I met with the familiar thud sound again that reconfirms that this isn't a jogger. Another tree's fallen, but this time much further away. This is the first relief that I feel in a long time. I keep going now. Most of the light has faded now, but luckily I know the way back and I can actually follow my footprints in the snow to get back where I need to be. And then I make it back to home after God knows how long. I'm finally back at the start of the civilization, and I don't have to go much further to be back in the warm. I decided that I needed sleep, I needed rest, and that's what I got. I probably slept for a good 12 hours that day. In the morning, I couldn't bring myself to stay for much longer out there on my own, so I called my parents to say that I was going to be going back to stay with a friend. They said sure, that's no worries. A little confused why I come home early, but I said, I just feel like I should be back for a while. And they didn't question me any further. And eventually, I made it over to my friends and never mentioned the story. Now, I've never mentioned this story to anyone because I didn't want people to look at me weird and doubt me or maybe mess up my career. But I don't really have a logical explanation for what happened to me that day. I've never seen anything like it in my life. I would really like to think there was a rational explanation, like, oh, there was some crazy logger going around playing tricks on me, but it just does not seem to be the case. Maybe there's some kind of animal out there that I don't know about. I don't want to call it a Sasquatch because I'm sure it wasn't that and I don't really believe in them, but I don't really know what else to make of it. The best thing I can think of is that it's some strange animal, but what really gets to me is following my footprints and nothing around me. That makes it seem supernatural or paranormal, but it just can't be, surely. I never really got an answer to this and it still haunts me to this day. Every time I look at the forest, I feel half prepared to see them eyes glowing back at me. And every single time there's something that falls on the ground close to me, I get shudders and flashbacks to that experience on my own. I never got answers to what that thing actually was, but I'm not sure I actually want to know. I've never experienced anything like this or heard of any other similar stories, so I just don't know what to think. I decided to go hiking in Kekwa State Park. It's a place I'm extremely familiar with. The weather has been awful lately, so I haven't been kayaking. My time in the state park has been spent kayaking. I was the only person out there because the weather isn't great. I was on the Orange Trail maybe 2 miles in when all of a sudden I had the feeling of being watched. I have a sixth sense for this. I feel I'm being watched and there's normally an 80% chance that I am actually being watched. I stopped and watched for a few seconds. As I started back, I suddenly saw quick-paced movements out in the brush maybe 50 yards away. Something was trying to avoid being seen. Weird. I continue. As I continue down the trail, I continue to feel watched. All of a sudden, I'm walking and hear a maniac laughing in the distance, maybe 20 feet to my left. Now, I was the only person around. I haven't seen anyone in the entire park. I'm very unsettled now, but decide quickly that I must move on and keep up the pace. I tried to put it out of my mind, thinking that I'm just imagining things. Maybe 2 minutes later, I hear the same maniacal laughter off in the distance to my left, but this time closer, and I've picked up the pace substantially. Less than a minute later, I hear the laughter right behind me. There's an enormous amount of rustling and noises coming from the brush. I realised whatever this was right behind me, and I ran. I didn't look back, I just ran. Something told me just run as far as you can now. Within a mile, I was sucking wind. I had every ounce of energy completely depleted for my escape. I ended up becoming too weak to run. I stopped for a rest, but I didn't want to get completely rushed, so I turned around facing the direction that I'd been running from and took a knee. I was starting to calm down, but I still didn't feel safe. I tell myself keep going. As I struggled to my feet, I spotted something in the brush, a dark leather warp. I unfolded it and found 3 extremely sharp knives, like butcher knives, the type you could use to stab someone with. They were fresh. You could tell they'd been dropped off, like, within the same day. I let out an audible yelp when I realised what was inside the sheath. All of a sudden, every ounce of fear came running back. My body was telling myself that I must be very afraid, but I knew I had to keep it moving and not freeze. I ended up running back to civilization. I didn't grab the knives because, well, it would add an immense amount of danger to the situation. I had the feeling of being watched until I was about half a mile from the trailhead. Something was out there. Something that I don't know. Now, I'm not really scared of people, so the fact that my body was telling me to be very afraid and keep moving shows something was very off. So when my friend invited me to go to the Devi Crockett National Forest with him to camp, I was more than happy to oblige. We decided we would camp at Redcliffe Lake Campground for 2 nights. Then for the 3rd night, we would stay at a free camping spot somewhere off miles from the park road scattered throughout the forest. So the first couple of days went amazingly. I loved the smell of the pines, especially in East Texas, and the campsite was beautiful, not to mention the lake. We did some kayaking and hiking. The views there really helped my mindset too. It was awesome. However, on the 3rd morning, my friend got an emergency call and had to bow at the last second. It was slightly upsetting, but didn't necessarily mean that I had to go just because he did. So I decided to stick to the original plan and find a place to camp deep within the forest. After he left, I headed to the nearest forest information center and snagged a map. The map showed the nearby highways in the forest. I scouted a couple of park roads and made my way towards them. Another maybe 5 miles out of town, I find a park road, which is indicated by a numbered sign and is only a dirt road. I head down it and settle in for the adventure. The road wasn't very narrow, but it would have been a hassle to move 2 trucks around each other, which I didn't really encounter. I kept the map on my lap and followed the road with my fingers while also checking the road ahead for potholes. The woods got super dense around me and darker, and it all just kind of enveloped my truck. I don't know how many miles I travelled before I first came to another turnoff, but it was clear I was super deep in the woods. I travelled to where one of the campsites was supposed to be, which was a small loop. I turned down and to my surprise was met with a couple of trucks and RVs, or occupants outside cleaning guns or dressing deers. Now please don't come at me because I've never hunted, but it was hunting season, so I guess this wasn't too much of a surprise. For me though, this is highly off-putting, being with the weird looks I was getting, so I made the loop and continue on. Now I start to feel a little bit better, and drive a couple more miles and found very remote spots at the corner of the woods. I pulled over and set up the tent and a fire, bringing out a bottle of whiskey. I didn't have a great night and was burning some letters, so I got a little bit more messed up. So I ate food, put out the fire, headed into my tent and wind down. It didn't take me too long to fall asleep, and I sleep hard. I woke up at maybe 1 AM to the sound of footsteps circling around my campsite. Now I'm a pretty avid camper, so I just assume it was a critter checking out the human who decided to chill in his pad without asking, and I start to drift off again when I hear a cough. Now I instantly wake up. It was kind of weird, and I just laid there listening for footsteps as they approached my truck. Now luckily for me, I locked my truck, but heard the obvious sound of somebody trying the handle, then quietly shuffled over to the other side and trying the other handle. I had a spotlight that I brought with me, so I quietly unzipped the tent and pointed my light in the direction of the noise and shout out. I catch a brief glimpse of whoever it was in all camos sprinting off into the woods with no light. They took off, like, really, really quickly. I have no plans to follow them. I scanned the brush with my light and can't see anything. I turned off my light to see, but there's not really anything. Instead, I hear very loud crashing into the brush that got quieter and further away. So whoever it was ran into the dark woods with no light and all camo. Now, while considering the map, I know that this person ran off into a direction that doesn't have any roads or amenities. So maybe he was on private property, I don't know, but I was very scared. I just collapsed into my tent and decided I have to move, shoving my tent into the back seat. I get out of there like a bat out of hell basically, and eventually get to the main roads and find my way back to my hometown. I want to go back sometimes, but with my friends and maybe a gun. But yeah, it wasn't a fun experience for me and definitely was one of the most frightening of my life. So in 2015 and 16, I didn't know what I wanted to do after high school and joined a gap year program in the Colorado Rockies, specifically at Snow Mountain Ranch in Gunarby, Colorado. It's a part of YMCA of the Rockies. It was an awesome gig because although I worked, the room and the board was paid for, and I spent a lot of time hiking, canoeing and adventuring out of the resort with friends I made there, to lots of different towns, and honestly these are some of my best memories. I have some creepy experiences though in the woods, like coming across a small herd of moose at night, hearing coyotes in the distance, knowing that I'm being watched, but overall, it was nature, and although creepy, wasn't anything David Attenborough hasn't seen. The only unexplainable and creepy experience I had was by more than one person when we hiked, but mainly drove, through some old logging roads to an abandoned yurt in the middle of the forest. It's Halloween 2015, and there was a staff party. It was fun, and I went as Gumby in a full costume, but since it's a YMCA sanctioned event, there's no alcohol. We decided to ditch the party, and 7 of us crammed into my friend's Jeep to go make a party of our own. It had snowed, and my friend, who I will call Abby, knew about an abandoned yurt because of one of our fellow staff would go out there and drink by himself, which I thought was pretty weird, but we were all gung-ho and tired of the safety snacks and drinks of the party, so go for it. The snow started to pick up a bit more as we went out there, but since Abby had a decent off-road vehicle, we managed. Now, a bit of context on the yurt and the property. Like maybe a decade prior, there was a pine beetle infestation that killed a lot of trees, so they had to cut down lots of the forest. When I got there, they're in the middle of replanting everything, so logging had ceased since. Since there was miles of older logging roads just abandoned, but the YMCA turned them into Nordic ski trails for the winter time, so the yurt was out there for people who wanted to get out of the elements if they needed. So anyway, we drive out there, blasting Halloween soundtrack, which really helped make an ambience. Although it had been snowing a bit, there wasn't enough on the road yet to create an issue. After about a 30-minute drive into the woods, we pulled off to the side where there was a locked gate, so obviously we jumped it. We had brought pillows and blankets with us because we're going to try and stay the night. We had to walk another 15 minutes to get to it. It was in a really cool spot, like in a clearing at the bottom of a cliff. It was 15 miles into the woods and away from the main property. Time to get messed up. We drank and smoked for a good while and had a lot of fun. We made snow angels and a snowball fight. We went back into the yurt after a while and continued our consumption, telling scary stories. After a while, we start to get sleepy. We got in whatever sleeping bags or blankets we brought and tucked ourselves in. Made a couple of jokes as we fell asleep to break the silence, but after a bit we knocked out. I woke up to Abby's boyfriend shaking me. He points to the window. There was a shadow there all of a sudden, and a loud bang like something threw itself into the side of the yurt. Everyone was up now. The sight of something smacking against the canvas side started coming from all around. At first, I thought it was snow falling off the treetops, but we're in a large clearing with no trees over the yurt. Then, we heard the sounds of something climbing up on the 3 wooden steps and pausing. All of us hold our breaths now, and nothing. Not one sound. Abby was the only girl, and all of us decided that we should rush to the door except for Abby and see what was out there. We opened the door. Nothing. It was quiet as hell. The worst part is that once we've gone outside to investigate a bit, there's nothing. No footprints, no boot prints, or even snow tracks. The snow had blanketed over our prints earlier, so we know it's not ours, which we were looking at before. We thought that maybe the wind had lifted the canvas and made it flutter, but when we checked, it wasn't possible. It was super weird. We thought that maybe the staff member who came out to drink by himself was behind it, but there was literally no boot prints at all. I also don't think it was the wind because me and Abby's boyfriend saw the shadow by the window, and we all heard footprints on the steps. Now this story takes place in the early spring of 2016. I was living in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado and come home to spend a bit of time with my high school friends. One of our favourite things to do was to camp together and hike, since we all had a heavy affinity for the outdoors. On this particular occasion, we decided to tent camp at a park on Lake Georgetown in Georgetown, Texas. It was a public campsite, but I guess because of the time of year, we were the only ones in the park, so with this, we picked a site very close to water. We had a fun night, have a fire going, and drink some mead. Used a hookah in the tent, which was actually a bad idea because coal fell off and burnt a hole through the bottom. And we spoke about random things that we're up to after we graduated. We ended the night by the fire, drinking and eating canned food. One by one, each of us left the fire and retired into the tent. Me and my best friend are the last ones in, since we were right up on the water. We filled up a bucket with lake water, separated the logs and doused the fire. We then both drunkenly meandered our way over to the tent. Now I've always had trouble sleeping. Even when I'm drinking, I tend to just hang around for a bit. So I just lay back, staring up at the stars through the screen ceiling. I'm not sure why I did fall asleep, but I managed to relatively quickly. I do remember waking up with a bright orange light. At first, I thought maybe it was a friend that went to grab something out of the truck, who was unlocking it, triggering the parking lights. But this orange light got bigger and moved too much to be stationary. I unzip the tent flap and see the fires going again. Now, this happened to me before. If you don't douse a fire enough, it can still reignite with enough oxygen, or depending if something was thrown in there, can burn for a while. But then I noticed that there are pieces of fabric and paper and the fire was going. I woke up my friends and they're all as creeped out as I am. That's when we saw something at the end of the brush. There was a guy in a red jacket who had kind of balding hair. He's staring at us with an empty stare with an empty bottle in one hand. It made our blood run cold, but also, being dumb kids, but he already made a head start. And that's before we made the decision. He was already getting away. We left the next day and called whoever manages the park about the incident. We had checked the fire to see if there was anything salvageable, but unfortunately everything is incinerated. They told us that the Georgetown PD would do more rounds in the park, but that was about it. We quickly forgot about it because it was a pretty one-off experience and the dude didn't hurt us directly. And of course, we all started going to college and stuff, but it was still a pretty scary experience for all of us. Working as a park ranger, there was lots of crazy things that I've seen out in the woods on my own. I'll go through a few for you today. I remember one time one of my colleagues radioed in saying that he was sure he saw a meteorite or a white UFO crash in the distance one night. I said, okay, I don't know what you've taken, but I'm gonna go and investigate, half joking with him. As I set out in my truck, I realized that there was some kind of emergency beacon, and my god, he wasn't wrong. There was a fire trail in the woods that luckily hadn't spread, and, half expecting to find something from out of this world, I was very surprised to find a plane that had crashed. By the grace of God, everybody lived from the accident and was fine, but it was crazy to see. Honestly, it was like something out of a movie. Now that was my first story. The next one is a complete different thing. It was when I was on vacation in a desert with some of my cousins. Now we were going on this long hike and it was close to nightfall. Now my youngest cousin kept on sprinting off, and it didn't bother us because a few of us were actually rangers or had military experience, so we felt relatively safe. Now, my cousin twisted his ankle and we're all quite annoyed because we know how dangerous this is. If it's a fracture or break, it's going to take a while before we can get back to help. Now, I rush over to go and help him, and I also fall down too. I fall down onto rocks and land on some kind of scrub or destroyed wood. I don't really know how to describe it, but almost like a big bit of wood that's been there for years that was once a tree. Now this thing snaps and my other cousin grabs my arm and says, "Jesus Christ." I say, "Yeah, I know it's slippery here." He says, "No, look." He then shines his torch off to the left and I can see literally hundreds of cactuses below. It was a good 20 feet drop down off of these rocks too. If I had fallen into them, well, I don't even want to think about what could have happened. More than anything, I was just glad that my youngest cousin hadn't gone and got hurt, because God, I wouldn't be able to forgive myself if that happened. Now, for my next story, this is more just creepy than anything. I wouldn't necessarily say it was a paranormal experience, but just something really odd. Now, while I was working as a ranger, one particular evening I got a call out to go and investigate a potential illegal fire, and I thought, yeah, that's fine. I wasn't too worried about it. To be honest, normally the fires in the area that I was working in didn't spread very quickly, so you didn't have to worry much. It wasn't like there was going to be huge wildfires, and the firefighting service were extremely good where I was based. I radio in and say I'm only about 10 minutes away, I'll go check it out. Now, I remembered going to investigate this area, and when I got there I can't see anything. There is, however, a strange light just above the tree line. I think this is really odd. It's not like a plane or helicopter, more like a drone, but this was actually in the times before we had drones, so I think this is a bit odd. It eventually flies off really quickly, and I think maybe the military are doing something here. Eventually I make it back to the station and radio in what happened. Someone else answers saying, "Thank God. We haven't heard anything back from you for hours. What happened? We're really worried about you and we're starting to investigate." I confused, say, "No, I was only out for probably 20 minutes. What are you talking about?" I then look over to the clock and I realize that I've been out for a good 5 hours. Even to this day, I still can't explain the experience, and it kind of gives me chills in a way. Now, for my last experience, it's kind of a weird one, but I want to know what you guys think about it. So this story actually comes from a friend of mine and not me directly. He said that he was out on a hike one day when he becomes completely lost. Now, he was lost to the point that he thought he wasn't going to make it back, and he didn't have any communication equipment at the time. He had basic survival training, so was actually okay, but he really thought he wasn't going to make it. Now, one morning when he was trying to figure out what to do or praying for signs of rescue, he sees a yellow dog up ahead of him. He's convinced that he's hallucinating, but he goes over to see what it's doing. It's playing with something in its mouth, and he quickly grabs it off, realizing that it's his shoe. He puts it on again and says, "Hey buddy, what are you doing here?" With the dog beginning to walk off. He decides to follow it. The dog keeps looking back and pointing almost in the direction to go. He says he's accompanied by the dog for at least 2 hours until eventually it runs off down an area that he can't actually see into. Worried about losing his friend, he sprints off after it and he's met by a group of other people. It's a search and rescue team. One of them runs over giving him water saying, "How are you?" He says, "Great, your dog must have saved my life." He looks at him a bit weirdly then at his buddy and says, "You need some water, bad." And eventually he gets taken off to a hospital. He eventually recovers and is completely fine. He goes to ask some of the rescue team what happened to the dog. Was it a wild one? And they say, "There was no dog there. We didn't know what you were talking about. We thought maybe it was a stray one and you got bitten or something and were going crazy, so we had a look round, but there was definitely no dogs." Now what makes this even more weird is the fact that my friend still has that shoe to this day, with clear bite marks from a dog that couldn't be made by a person. Now I'm very lucky where I live. There's a beautiful forest and river that's not too far away. The river starts near the houses and the people, but if you follow it down long enough, you can eventually get over to a really nice secluded area of woodland. Now, I was previously a forest ranger, so as you can imagine, I always like to be out in nature and exploring generally. Now, for a while I didn't actually go out much. I still wanted to explore and whatnot, but I couldn't be bothered where it was extremely cold, so I waited until it became around April, May time, and I once again started following the river. The river had some birds and things on it, and some other big fish that you would very occasionally see in the river. I never bothered to fish any of these because I couldn't be bothered to, but I thought it was a really nice touch. Often I would find myself putting in my headphones, listening to some kind of book or just relaxing music and having a stroll down. I don't know, sometimes you can feel like the world's getting on top of you for no reason, and it's important to just get outside to relax. So in one particular morning I was doing just this. Now I know what you're thinking, surely if anything scary was going to happen it would be at night, not in the very early hours of the morning, but wait, I'll get to that part. So I set off like normal. I decided to stay far from the river because the rocks actually really hurt my feet sometimes and I have an issue with them. I say hello to one of my friends as I'm walking and I can see that he's just sitting by the rocks having a good time relaxing. People are good, but at this moment I need to get away just to clear my head up. It's still pretty warm at this time, though the weather's been very bipolar. I continue down until eventually I'm just out of sight of the other people. Now the area that I live in doesn't really have many people to begin with, so you don't have to go very far to be truly secluded or in what feels like the middle of nowhere, and often is. Now when I'm walking, I see a very large thing flying out of the corner of my eye. I just catch it before it goes off into the tree line, and I realise there's a very large bird there. It's strange because it looks all black and its beak looks very big. I think this is pretty strange because I've not really seen these before. It's hard to describe, but it's like a larger than life crow. I think this is odd and I continue onwards. I turn off my music for a while because I want to save my headphones and phone battery. I continue going and the forest gets a little bit darker, just because there's not much tree coverage. You have to be careful while you keep following this river though, because of course, the further you go in, the harder it is to get out, and I don't really want to be stuck out here alone. Now every so often, I hear this god-awful noise coming from the bird. I can't describe it other than just saying it's a horrifying sound. It's almost like a screech that sounds like it's human, but it's not quite. I haven't heard anything like it since too, which is pretty odd. I assume that it's gotta be another animal that this bird has just gone and annoyed, because surely this isn't making that much sound. I really wish I could describe it to you, but I can't. It's almost like a piercing sound, like metal being scraped, but more biological sounding. It really throws me off when I'm walking because it makes me jump and my eyes actually go blurry for a second from the adrenaline and the panic of it. I decide I should just keep on now. Now, one really strange thing about this is that the bird seems to be following me. Now, I might be paranoid, but I decided to pick up a rock just in case I needed to scare this thing off. I mean, hey, it was ruining my lovely day for me. But eventually, along with my new friend the rock in my pocket, I forget about the bird and continue on my way. As I continue walking, I can see some strange markings on some of the trees. I think the children, or not really children, I guess teenagers or rebels, whatever you want to call them, have gone and put some weird red spray paint onto some of the trees. They're kind of like weird cross symbols, but not exactly. I know this hasn't been marked out by authorities because I know what that looks like from my previous experience of being a ranger. I make a mental note to maybe report this to the authorities so they can stop these stupid kids destroying the beautiful nature. God, I really hate things like that. I love nothing more than untouched nature. I hate when people don't realise the damage they're doing, and that if they do this over time, it's not going to look good. Plus, it's probably not very healthy for the trees, but I digress. I continue on to my walk until it's about midday. The sun's still nice and high in the sky, and I'm just sitting down to relax for a bit. I decide that I can't really be bothered to walk much further because my feet have started hurting from walking on the rocks close to the stream, and I want to get back to eat. I'm starting to get hungry. I have 2 small protein bars, but they aren't really doing it for some reason. As I'm sitting down, I realise that the hair on the back of my neck has stood up suddenly. I think maybe a mosquito's landed on me, and I actually slapped the back of my neck to try and kill it if there is. Nothing. I just slapped myself for no reason. I think that's a little odd. I suddenly noticed some movement again in the distance. Now, I can't make out exactly what it is, but whatever this is on the ground now, and I know for a fact it's not that bird. I think maybe there's some animal around. I'm not really in an area that has big bears or animals like that I have to be scared of, but you never know. If one of these things is hungry and injured or thinks I'm trying to get to its babies, I don't really want to be standing in its way. I decided I should pick up the pace and go a little further. It's starting to get cold too, which is annoying because I've only got my light jumper and shirt on. I originally had the jumper tied around my waist but quickly put it on. Now, as I continue on, I can't shake the feeling that something is just off. I was kind of triggered by the symbols, and that starts to race through my mind again. As I continue on, I stop suddenly and realise something looks off. I look off to the left, and I'm sure I can see somebody standing by a fire moving round. I look to the right just to make sure there's no other ones, and to my left again, and the person vanishes, but where they were standing is exactly the same. It looks a little odd because there's lots of foot tracks around, and they look recent. I decide I should be very cautious now, and slow down for a minute, stop, breathe, and just observe. I definitely can't hear anything, and I decide that it's just my mind playing tricks on me. Now I know what you're thinking, oh, you're a ranger, this shouldn't happen, but trust me, if you're in a job that's that isolated, you actually get used to the fact that sometimes your mind's going to fill in the gaps. It's not necessarily from you being bored, but more your brain. There's a thing where your brain tries to create images that aren't actually there, and I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but look it up and you'll know what I mean. So, I hesitantly make my way over there. As I get there, I realise that the ground seems to have been burned recently by a fire. It's almost like a bunch of people have been dancing around here, but I can't figure out exactly why this is. I look around and there should be people here. The fire's only gone out recently, but there's no one. And then, just to my left, I see movements out the corner of my eye again. I'm not sure why, it always seems to be on my left side no matter where I move to. I actually rub my eye to make sure that nothing's in it. And then, I think, what's he doing out here? Why did he make a fire here? I say, hey, and my friend's name, what are you doing? And then there's just laughter. Now the strange thing is, the laughter doesn't seem like my friend, if that makes sense. It's still my friend's voice, but it's not welcoming. I say, hey, where are you? What are you doing? Now I realise something is off. I look around and I cannot see my friend anywhere, but I keep hearing my name being called out. I say, yeah, this is really funny, but what are you doing? I look around and again, I can't see anything. I say, hey, that's really funny, but I'm gonna go now. The voice then says, no you're not, followed by more laughing. Now I'm not afraid to use it. I turn around to leave and the large bird is there, just staring dead at me, almost like it's been waiting. I actually dropped the rock in fear. I didn't realise this at the time because of the adrenaline. It sounded almost like the laughter sounds were coming just from this bird. I pick up the rock again and start clapping, trying to make sounds for it to move, but it doesn't. It's something that I've never seen before. It's literally like a crow, but maybe 3 times as big or 4 times as big as a normal crow. And it doesn't seem to have eyes. I can't really tell because I didn't have my glasses on at the time, but it does not have eyes. I'm almost convinced of this. And I get a really weird feeling wash over me. I hear something behind me. I glance over my shoulder and glance back, and the bird's gone. That's about all I needed for my brain to tell me it's time you get out of here. So, I decide to start out with a more medium pace. I don't want to burn myself out, and my trainers told me that it's much better that you hike and you don't get injured than if you just sprint out of here. But this feels more urgent now. Now I'm a relatively big guy, I guess, or maybe medium, I don't know. But I know if I really launch a rock I can probably hurt something. So I have my rock in my hand ready to just attack. Now I decide something's definitely off, and I know it's not my body playing tricks on me. We used to mess around with each other in the ranger station some days, but never like this. I mean, this is ridiculous even for me. But if this was them playing tricks on me, I'd probably respect it and actually find it really funny, but I decide I have to get on. I think what's weirdest is that the bird's followed me so far. I'm not sure whether it's very injured and it wants to eat me when I'm dead like vultures do, but this isn't a vulture. I decide that I should probably get out of here as quick as possible, and great for me, the easiest way to get back is following the river. I've not really been this far into the forest too, so I decide that I can't really afford to get lost here, and it'll probably get quite cold at night and I'd struggle if I couldn't make a fire. I didn't have a lighter on me at the time, so I know this isn't really an option. Again, with my training I can actually make a fire, but I'm not gonna. So I continue going. I continue a mild pace for about 5 minutes before I have to stop because the rocks are really hurting my feet again. I stop for a few minutes and start laughing to myself, thinking, what was wrong with me? And there's a loud splash just to my left again. Why does this keep coming from my left, I say as I slap myself on the side of the head, just enough to try and wake myself up. And there's a large splash of water that just hits me. A large rock has just been thrown into the water next to me, and there's that stupid crow. I throw a rock as hard as I can and it just flies out of the way. What the hell is this thing, I think to myself. Why is it following me? I now break some of my own rules and panic a bit and start sprinting. This is accompanied by laughter of my friend's voice again. Now, you can imagine I went into high gear now. Through the grace of God, I actually didn't hurt myself on the rocks or fall. Well, not for a few minutes at least. I eventually tripped and hurt my leg, and I started laughing to myself as I got up again, saying, "This is such a me thing to do," and I continue going. The laughter becomes ever more faint as I continue on, trying desperately to get back. I sprint for a long time, and luckily I'm fairly athletic, so I managed to make it out of the secluded area into a more medium part, if that makes sense, where you're not too far from civilization. I turn around again and realise that I can no longer hear the laughing, and I don't think the crow thing's following me anymore. After a bit longer, I realise that I'm up to relative safety now, and I'm not far from where my friend is. I'm very, very relieved to realise that. When he sees me, he says, "Hey, what's wrong?" I say, "Yeah, I just had a bad fall, I'm fine," and continue on. I made it home, and of course the first thing I did was call my friend, saying, "Hey, what are you doing right now?" He says, "Oh, I'm just at home with my wife and kids. We've been home all day." I don't need to hear anything else and say, "Oh great," make up some excuse and end the call. That was confirmation in my mind that this is one messed up situation that I still don't have an explanation for to this day. I don't know what that bird thing was doing or who that person was out there, but I'm glad I never had to find out. I would hate to say it was anything paranormal, but my mind instantly goes to some of the old folklores about creatures out in the woods that can imitate yourself or others. I don't want to say it was that, but I kind of hope it was, because if it wasn't the case, it was probably people with speakers trying to capture or kidnap me, but I just don't think that seems likely with where I live and everything. I don't know, it was a pretty awful experience that I'm trying my best to forget about. And yes, I haven't been back to that area since. Even if I do my own solo hikes now, I don't ever have my headphones in. I'm always listening, expecting to hear that crow or my friend's laughter again. I was hiking with my dad in late September on the west coast of Vancouver Island, which is usually when bears are flanting up for the hibernation are most likely to be aggressive, and since we're a couple of days walk from either the trailhead, we're on high alert. This is where we can only get medical attention, so we're far from safety. It's a rain constantly, and we only had seen a single other hiker the whole time. He was travelling the opposite direction, and we had camped beside him 2 nights prior, so for the whole trip, the only tracks that we saw looked remotely fresh, and were a single set of boots hiking coming towards us. It was a pleasant and solitary German tourist, and we'd only seen them in places with extensive overhead cover. The other tracks were washed out and filled with rainwater due to the days and days of constant rain, and it was really making it hard to figure out where to go at times. We were approaching a blackberry patch between ridges and hugged a small creek and smelled what we thought was a particular stinky bear, and since the blackberries were on both sides of the trail, with it only being about 3 meters between them, we have our heads on a shrivel. There was no overhanging trees at this particular berry patch, and there were dozens of meters across, and they're probably 2 meters high. My dad told me to hurry through as quick as we can and made a comment about how smart it was that we have the bear bells on us, and how dangerous it is to startle a feeding bear. He was a couple of meters ahead of me when I looked down and see a footprint. Now, it looked like an unshoed human footprint, except it's probably 2 inches wider and at least 2 inches longer than mine, and I have size 14 feet. There's also dermal ridges and only a couple of inches or so of raindrops, so it had been there recently. I mean, the scariest thing about it was that there was no other prints whatsoever, so it just appeared suddenly almost. It was so startled, probably, but so was I. I looked around as much as I could before my dad lovingly told me, "Hurry up," and that was the only track that there wasn't now a small puddle in. So before you discount it as double stepping bear prints, where a bear's gone back before. There's no way it could have crossed that 3 meter distance without leaving more prints. Say what you want about black bears. They're not peaceful or graceful. There are also no grizzly bears here too, and there's no cougar that could have done this. It was also not a hoax too, because we would have definitely seen a person there, and to be interacting with the bears was dangerous to say the least. Now it's pretty weird though. We eventually managed to make it out of there without too much happening, but I don't really believe in Sasquatches, but I don't know what to believe. The more my dad explained it to me, it couldn't have really been a bear, so I don't really know what to think. And on top of that, the smell there was one of the worst things I've ever smelled in my life. I will never forget the image of the raindrops hitting the fresh tracks as I stared in disbelief. I grew up in a small town in western Massachusetts. It was a sleepy little community, and not much happened in the way of excitement, but this weekend we were going camping. It was a Memorial Day weekend, and it just turned 11. When we got to the campground and got set up, we were mainly by ourselves, and we only saw a few other families along the trail on the way to our campsite, and it was really peaceful. And after a long day of setting up and getting situated, I'm ready to crash out on my tent. Help me, help, oh God, I hear. I woke up like an alarm had gone off, and I can hear this woman screaming at the top of her lungs. She came running into our campsite and was in absolute hysterics with fear. My parents approached her to ask if she was hurt and offered her help. She pushed past and kept running, all the while screaming. We followed her to the ranger station, as did a few other people from nearby campsites. She woke up the entire campground with her screaming. I remember the police showing up and all the flashing blue and red lights. 2 officers were standing around her as the paramedics wrapped her in blankets. She kept saying the same thing over and over again. It's a werewolf, it has to be. The paramedics load her up in the ambulance and it drives away. A few more cops appear and begin searching through the woods. My dad said go back into the tent and sleep. I don't know what happened after that. Sometimes I still talk about the nights that it happened with my parents. We all remembered it and it still gives us goosebumps. I don't know what the girls saw in the woods that night. I don't know if it's still out there. So this story takes place in southeast Texas, within 100 miles of Houston. I was in college but had moved back in with my parents for a semester after some roommate drama. My parents live out in the country, miles outside of town with some acreage. The land in the back of the house consists of 4 zones really. You got to the backyard with the nice St. Augustine. The back, which is a section of woods my parents cleared of underbrush and kept a fairly well-maintained area. The back, which is a clearing that we used to go back to and do bonfires and parties in high school, and then the woods. After high school, my parents kind of gave up on keeping back the brush and weeds and anything except for their nice section of backyard. So imagine a big backyard fenced by a wall of tall weeds and large trees that goes back for a while, then a giant field of weeds, transitioning into soil and dense woods and some oak and pine wood. I also had this dog that my parents let me keep outside. I had a big chain-link dog who lived in there since my parents had no permitting fencing besides some barbed wire at the very back of the property, and this dog wasn't really the kind to stay in one area. It was a fact that she was so aggressive to other dogs, always going after them and acting tough. I sometimes worried she'd go out and get some of the chickens. She was about 60 pounds too. Now since I was in college, I had no curfew or anything and would always come home late at night / early morning after hanging out with friends or studying or whatnot. On this particular night, it was pretty cold out. Even though she still had a house and bed and straw out there, I felt bad for my dog, so decided to bring her in to sleep in the garage. I should mention, now I probably should have been more careful because this happens quite a lot, but somehow this dog always got me. She would wait in the back until the gate was unlocked, and I was in the run, the gate closed with the unlocked horse latch. Run around me and pop the gate latch with her nose and bolt off, so of course she did it. And I was standing there in the cold in the middle of the night, annoyed because I knew I had to find her and return her. The moon was pretty bright, and I had seen her flying into the weed wall and disappear, so I followed her into the night, calling her name. There were some little trails through the weeds, and we tried to keep open so that we can access the property, but they were less wide than a person can walk through, and the weeds are taller than my head. It was dense. Anyway, I'd gone a ways, and we had passed through the wooded section out into the clearing, and I get quiet, trying to listen to where she's gone, and I hear intermittent rustling out in the woods, which at this point I've got to point out is a really dark outline of the tree line and weed jungle. The rustling wasn't the sound I expected, since she usually crashes through the woods. In my head, I'm thinking, what the hell is she doing now? Honestly, I thought she's probably rolling around in some dead skunk, and I was gonna have to bathe her. Figuring it was my wild dog making the noise, I call out her name again. As I got closer, it becomes apparent the rustling is not the sound of an animal charging through the underbrush, but more like something intentionally shaking the trees. Like if you grab a branch and shake it, and all of the connected trees and vines shake too. It was close enough now to make out individual branches silhouetted at the top of the tree line, and I could see that whatever was going on was causing the trees to shake all the way to the top. This was off, and decidedly not my dog pacing around. I'm quiet and freeze. I hear in all these stories people talking about how they notice something in the woods go silent. I can't remember this happening really, but as I stood there, I clearly hear 2 or 3 loud deep huffs. I guess it kind of sounded like a ball with a deeper fluctuating, kind of fluttering sound. And it seems to be coming from around my head height. For some reason, my mind kept registering that this thing was a lot closer to me than the tree line. I remember the distinct feeling that the noise is directed towards me, and I get a feeling in my gut like my whole body is stuck. Now, rational or not, I yell my dog's name, and with all my fear and urgency, I turn and ran as hard as I can. Either my dog heard my tone and got scared, or she was scared of whatever was in the tree line, because as soon as I crash through the weeds, she comes off on my left like a bullet. When I got to the open garage, she was trying to get in, desperately jumping. I closed the garage and put her in the kennel and went to bed. I don't know what it was, and at the time I convinced myself it was one of those hog sealers that you hear about on the news. I've been around plenty of cattle and have never heard one make a noise like that. Not saying it could have been something dodgy, but it just doesn't seem right. This was like 10 years ago, so I'll never know for sure, but I'm trying to think real hard of what it could have been in terms of a logical explanation. My uncle has a large area of wooded property in Missouri. It's about a 1.5 hour drive from St. Louis. He has a cabin there, a small man-made lake, and trails throughout the woods. When we visited, we would spend a lot of time driving ATVs down the trails. One of the trails leads to an abandoned mining area. The area has a toppled over mine shaft, a couple of cement buildings, and a sheet metal storage shed for core samples. And the sheet metal building with showers has a couple of rooms. There's a metal fence separating the 2 sections of it, which are mostly intact. A lot of the area hasn't been used for mining for lots of decades, probably even a century. All of this lies in a large open area that has no trees and just sand and mud flats, which made it a perfect place to drive 4-wheelers. We'd visit a few times each year, and take out the 4-wheelers out to the flats and have a great time riding. We never felt unsafe, and sometimes we would even go out to night to stargaze. Eventually we began to realise that there's these sites popping up at the edge of the woods around the flats. like sticks stuck in the ground, in lines or weird circle patterns, almost like burn piles. And there was eventually shotgun shells, bullet casing, and beers around sometimes. We'd even see weird symbols on the floor. It was made out of trash or spray painted. Basically, it looked like people were shooting targets and drinking out on the flats with a touch of weirdness with the symbols. I didn't really think much of it, and we just decided that we wouldn't go out at night and started carrying guns around with us when we go out. What finally did it for me and kept me from going back out there is when we discovered that the fence has been nearly completely destroyed. Only the posts are left, and on every post there's some can or jar of something on top. And throughout the flats on the trails, it's rampant with these weird things everywhere. Kind of like containers stuck onto the end of branches and whatnot. Again, it wasn't too weird. Like, we know people like to go out on break and stuff and just do stupid things, but what got us was the scope of it. The fence was probably half a mile in length and every section of metal mesh had been removed, which would have been considerable because it would take a long time to do it and you'd actually need bolt cutters. And that alone wouldn't be too weird, but the thing is, none of the metal was gone. That was probably the most valuable thing. I would understand if they took the metal, but why would they just leave it there perfectly intact? Now, the last time that I was actually brave enough to go out there was 10 years ago. I've now moved states and have limited contact with that part of the family, so I don't know if anything else has happened. So it's nothing paranormal, just really weird. My husband and I always love to go camping. We live in CA and set aside 2 weeks every summer for a camping trip where we can get away and disconnect from the real world. Normally, we hit Death Valley for some backcountry adventures for a few days, then heading up into the mountains for some fishing. On the way back home, we usually stop for one last hurrah in Eastern Sierra. On this particular trip, my husband, myself, and our German Shepherd, Ginger, are going. We ended up finding a lake to swim in for the day, and when we got tired, decided to find a spot to camp. We were both pretty familiar with that area, and knew that there was a free campground about 12 miles up the mountain. I never liked the Pacific campground because it was very cold at night at that elevation, even in the summer, but whatever. It was free and we had plenty of firewood. We pulled into the campground and there was only one tent pitched, but we didn't see any people at all. In fact, the whole evening there was not a single other person in sight. I loved it. It's really nice when it's empty and it feels primitive and nice and remote, so it was rare even to see a car driving past. After we got set up, the beer was flowing very freely. We were pretty trashed and hung out for a bit, cooked dinner over a campfire and hit the sack. My dog husband and I were all asleep and awoken by an ungodly scream in the middle of night. One of us grabbed the phone to see what time it was, and then my husband gets his gun, told me to stay there, and went out to see what was going on. Of course I want to peek out, and there was one guy standing right in front of the other tent that was set up across the stream, looking at the sky and just screaming. It was a horrific scream, loud and terrifying, normally just like something that would prompt a phone call to the police, but due to the area's remoteness, the cell signal is non-existent. My husband didn't want to go over there for obvious reasons, so he came back to the tent, and I don't think any of us slept a wink the rest of the night. The next morning we packed up and left as soon as we could. That same tent was still there, but again, no one in sight. We actually drove past there a couple of days later, out of curiosity, and the tent was still pitched in the same spot. There were no other campers there. This is about 10 years ago, and when we visited the area frequently, this was about 10 years ago, and we still visit the area frequently, since we now have a cabin about 20 miles from the campground. When we take a drive up the mountain and pass that campground, The scream is always the first thing we think about and wonder what was happening. I'm gonna try and keep things clean and concise and to the point, so I'm gonna start with the creepy but natural. I've been a hunter since I was like 13, maybe earlier, so I don't really remember, but being out in the woods since I was young means that I get to see or hear things that I can normally ensure that I wouldn't see in the cities. I've had a few different instances where I've been thoroughly creeped out in the woods, and I'll get to them, but I want to start with a not as bad one. So the guy who owns the land that we hunt on decided it was going to be a good idea to store some of the equipment on his land, one of which is a styrofoam float. Now, one year we got out there to check it out and pick it up, and that big piece of styrofoam had met its demise to a bear. Now you could tell that the bear really had a go at this thing because it was torn to shreds. Now, it almost looks like a bomb had gone off next to it. It makes you kind of worried about what bears are actually capable of. But anyway, now to the first real story. I was stalked by a cougar a few years back. When we had a deeper opener, I liked walking through the roads occasionally, and one of the first things I noticed this year is that I could have taken a picture of a set of tracks, really big tracks. I wish I did. The cat was obviously stalking over other animals in the area, but me being me, I decided that I shouldn't be scared of that, and it's probably more scared of me, but sure enough I jinxed myself. I attempt to do a deer push through some of the real thick brush to try and jump up and scare a deer, and get it to move through towards the other hunters in my party. I'm going to get to that soon, and I'm moving through the woods, yet I can hear something moving behind me. Every time I would stop, the noise would stop. I eventually got nerved, especially with the forest being quiet, and I decide that I'm going to get attacked by something that's found me. It's probably better if I'm facing it. So I turn around and walk straight back the way I came from and raise my weapon. When I began retreating back to where I come from, directly towards whatever it was making the sounds, I see a tan flash of fur and a long tail low to the ground turn around and run away from me. Then, the next day as I was doing a walk up to the main road with my rifle, I'm close to the tree line when I hear a deep growl. Immediately to my right, I turn my rifle to see the face of the cougar at my stomach level because it was raised up on the ground and towards the dirt. I calmly backed away and walked up towards the road that I came from. Now for wolves. One of my favourite ones, and it's quite a simple one. A few years back, my dad shot a deer and we gutted it. If anyone here is familiar with the field dressing of an animal, you typically gut the pile just out in the woods. This was like that this year, and we found out that there's a wolf pack that had actually moved onto the property. So, my dad leaves a gut pile a couple of 100 yards away from the stand. The day after, I was sitting in my dad's stand while he was doing a big loop on the property trying to scare deer towards me, and he was getting close to me, which I didn't know at the time. I was sitting in the stand and I heard a kind of wolf yelp from the gut pile. I texted my dad and told him he better hurry up because there's a wolf pack between us. Sure enough, by the time he made it back to me, he also heard the same thing, and it was within less than 100 yards away now. This year, just in November, I actually took pictures of old tracks very close to the trail and next to my size 13 boot, and the tracks are huge. I know there's one set of 4 that are walking together. I took a picture of the biggest tracks and I found out the wolf's probably 200 pounds or more, so it's definitely something you don't want to encounter out there. Now, for the one that sticks with me, this is the one that I want you guys to hear. Somewhere around 2006 or 7 when I was a late teen, I was at my grandpa's cabin and with my grandparents and my cousin. This was the last summer in northern Wisconsin, Danbury to be specific. The incident happened in midday when the sun was high in the sky and it was pretty warm out. My cousins and I decided that We would play some airsoft, and I was wearing camouflage and decided that I would have a better chance of not being seen this way, and being able to ambush him by going into the woods, which was about an acre attached to where the cabins are off to, though it was really an acre that my grandparents owned. Now there were trails cut through, and a big entrance which splits into a Y and loops around. This was used as a short ATV trail. Now while we're battling with the airsoft guns, we continue all the way up into the trail about halfway. We were still both winded and at the top of the hill next to a clearing in the woods when I decided to mess with my cousin and shush him and say we're being watched. Now mind you, I intended this as a joke, but we both got quiet. I realised the woods were dead quiet, like you could hear a pin drop. I could only hear my own breathing and immediately feel like we're being watched, so I look in the directions all around us and try and figure out where this thing's coming from, scanning from edge to edge, and look into a clearing that goes down to a hill and a watering hole or pond or something. We're sure we're gonna see animals there. I scan left to right, then back and halfway on the right, really trying to focus on what was going on. That's when it came into focus, when I saw teeth. Teeth in the mouth of what looked like a wolf panting, except it's very tall. I mean, it's probably like to my stomach or chest height, and I'm 6'4". As I was taking in these details in a short amount of time, I realised the thing is staring at us, maybe even more at my cousin who's smaller than me. And I also realised that this wolf was not on all fours but crouching on its back legs against a tree, with its arms wrapped around the tree. That's right next to its arm. And this thing's almost holding its arms out to us with its long claws. In the short time that I looked at it, I said to my cousin that we have to go. Now my cousin took off like a bat out of hell. Being a baseball player, he was a bit quicker than me. He ran and I looked back at the creature and it locked on with laser focus, took my cousin and stood all the way up and began running towards us, which makes me run. What I remembered from it is that it was significantly taller than me, completely upright, and when I ran, I could hear it crashing through the woods behind me. After running and running, we eventually reached the wire, and this thing is standing there, waiting for me. I tell my cousin go, go, go. We ran into the parking area by the shed and stopped talking because it sounded like it stopped chasing us now. At this point, we agree we can't tell our grandparents because what we saw essentially appears to be a werewolf, and probably is more likely a bear, but I don't know. Unfortunately, my cousin never actually got a look at it other than just a flash of reddish fur, maybe more of a brown colour. But then again, he's lucky because every time I think about it I get scared. I'm leading up to this, and even afterwards, I've always had a bad feeling about that night. Now, whenever I'm by the campfire, I always feel like I'm being watched. One of the things for you guys to memorize is that if you're out in the woods, if the woods go quiet eerily, most likely there's a large predator in the area. If you have a gut feeling, you should just follow it. Gut instincts are the reasons that our ancestors stayed alive. If I'd frozen fear, we would have died. I have one last thing to add, which is from a few years ago when I was hiking with my wife in a local park. We got followed by an unknown animal. As we're moving up through the trails through the woods, there is something tracking us, moving as we're moving, stopping while we stop. What made this weird is that it wasn't like a normal animal, but it sounded like we were really being followed tree to tree, and it sounded big. The reason why I said this is the thing chased me and my cousin, and people say that it's a dog man. They say that they're intelligent and apparently good at tree climbing. I also say that these creatures are apparently really good at following people, and seemingly managing to stay out of sight for a long while. This happened many years ago, in the summer of '87. At the time I was 19, and my best friend was 18. We were visiting her boyfriend at his house, which was situated basically in a wooded area next to a large field, in a very rural tobacco growing area in the south. It was dark out, but you could see fairly well because the sky was clear and full of stars. She and I are resting on the front porch with our feet resting on the steps. We're just talking and laughing when all of a sudden we saw a round, brightly lit object just a few feet above the tree, maybe 30 or so in front of us and about 50 above us, hovering just at the treetops. It had red and white lights all around it, but still wasn't bright enough. Then it gave more of a bright glow. The lights were flashing a lot and we just sat there silently. We don't make any noise at all. Now, this thing was like it was sitting there watching us. We didn't feel afraid, mainly because we're fascinated and curious as to what it could possibly be. We sat there whispering back and forth, trying to figure out what it was for a good 3 to 4 minutes, with her boyfriend opening the door finally to come out, and we turned and told him to hurry and come and look at this. He reached out and flipped on the porch light before he could even get out from under the porch light to see it. It then went straight up, about 20 feet-ish, and then zipped out of sight, diagonally. Then it disappeared completely in maybe a matter of 3 seconds. Her boyfriend and his brother had previously told us that they'd worked in the middle of the night a few years ago, and had seen some bright lights coming from their bedroom window. They thought it was police cars, but when they looked out the window, they saw a round, brightly lit object hovering in a field above the trees, maybe 10 feet above the ground. Nobody believed them because they were kids. We even laughed it off until our encounter. Needless to say, neither of us had seen anything like it before, and I've never seen anything like it since. Now, my husband believes me, and we've spent many nights looking into the sky to see anything like it again, but we haven't. This is something that happened to me when I was about 15 years old and was staying at my friend's house. I still get spooked just thinking about it, and I thought I might share it. I think it was on a Saturday that we were watching old movies, playing video games, or whatever he suggested that we'd do, like going for a walk in the forest and whatnot. I was bored and thought, why not? He said there were some old abandoned houses in the woods that I had never been to before or heard about before. I thought that was pretty cool, and he told me that he could show me around. So we headed out, and I brought a flashlight with me because it's getting dark. We began to walk through a trail surrounded by some unusually tall trees. This trail was getting deeper and deeper into the woods, and was soon not much more than tall grass, stones and trees. We had walked around for 30 or 40 minutes when it started getting really dark. I then asked if he was sure that we're going in the right direction when I suddenly noticed a small Dutch colonial style house peeking out of the trees. It was white and I think it had some kind of porch on it. It appeared deteriorated and truly abandoned from the outside. I turned around and noticed that my friend wasn't there anymore. I thought he was playing around with me, so I just kept casually walking towards the house and pretended that I didn't care. I looked through one of the windows and didn't see anything, but I heard a distinctive giggle above me. The weird thing is that it definitely sounded like a middle-aged woman, not my friend. I was a bit frightened and call out my friend's name, but he doesn't answer. I was so scared and angry that I yelled it really loud. The next thing that happened is something I can only describe as hell breaking loose. I heard a woman crying and wailing loudly and letting out these horrifying guttural screams. I didn't even know where it come from, but I was too terrified to do anything. Besides running, I go straight through the woods. Occasionally I tripped over rocks and stuff and ended up getting a big scar on the back of my lower leg. I reached the road and I think I'm about 15 minutes or so away from seeing a car, and luckily I find one. The guy was nice enough to drive me home and said, "Do I need help because I'm bleeding?" Here's a kicker though. I checked my phone and my friend had sent me 2 messages saying why did I leave and where was I. I was happy that he was alive, and I asked him if he's still in the woods. He didn't know what I was talking about and said he's been home the whole day. I thought he was joking, but I saw the first 2 messages were sent around the time when he should have been in the woods already. It's been many years since, and we're not hanging out anymore, but he maintained for a long time that he didn't go into the woods with me and that he was home the whole day when I suddenly just left without warning while he was in the bathroom. He said that he didn't know about any home in the woods either. So I'm not exactly a paranormal believer per se, though I have had a couple of experiences while hunting or hiking that I can't necessarily explain rationally. The most unnerving one probably happened 7 to 8 years back. Now normally, I would hunt on some property that my family owns. Don't even remember the reason anymore that I decided to hunt on public land this time. Probably just a change of scenery. I remembered that it was evening in fall but fairly uncharacteristically warm that day. I got to the access road and pulled off to the spot that everybody pulls off to park and walk in, and noticed that there's a couple of old boys already there. Nothing too weird about them, except there's no truck or vehicle for them to have pulled in on. They didn't have guns with them, but they're dressed in hunter orange, but at this time I figured that they're backpackers or campers. At the time, we're not too far away from this spot in a campground, so it's not uncommon for folks to spend weeks away from their family for some peace or quiet to go to a hunting trip. Anyway, they seemed friendly enough, and there was absolutely nothing said to make them seem any different than hundreds of other fellows I've met hunting. They're basically some hillbillies from the sounds of it, and we talked for a couple of minutes and they shot off. And I sat on my phone for a bit trying to give them a head start because I was afraid they'd drive off some of the squirrels. Except I clearly didn't wait long enough. Probably like 10 minutes up the trail, it curved to the left and I heard noises coming from directly ahead. It sounded bigger than a squirrel, but also it didn't seem like any animal that should be there. When I crept off the path ground and started to drop so I'd be able to look down and see my new pals, I realised that nothing's acting right. This is going to be hard to explain without a visual, but they were just moving, but not like normal people. Their movements were jerky, almost like they'd forgotten how to walk, and things like their knees and joints weren't able to bend. I didn't stick around too long because it was terrifying. I backed away slowly and quietly to the trail and then get into my car, then driving off. Now, I've spoken with several open-minded outdoorsmen in the area, and they think maybe they're on drugs, but I don't know. It just seems a lot different to the movement of people on drugs and looks very unnatural and scary. Okay, so I live in the woods around the Carolines. I'm just playing soccer outside and it's just me and my dog, and I suddenly hear some noise. I realise then that it's music. I have no idea where it come from, but it sounded like wind chimes. It sounds like there's multiple, but it got creepier. I was tempted to follow it, but I did not know what it was. I was freaked out and went back to my house. Come out a few hours later and I can still hear it coming from the woods. It suddenly stops again just as soon as it started, and now I'm totally freaked out. I'm from a different country, and I'm similar to what you guys call a park ranger, but with some subtle differences. Now basically, similar to a park ranger, I would have an area that I would have to cover and take shifts during my job. Often we didn't have too many crazy things happen, The biggest issue that we would find was when people would be lost out in the snow, they could literally freeze to death if they couldn't get help. It can be very difficult to get a fire going whenever there's snowfall, so this is something we're often very careful of. Now, there was one particular day that I was on my patrol like normal. Everything was normal and I didn't find anything, so I headed into the station for the day. As I headed in, I got word of apparently a potential missing persons, but also to be advised that this person's a little bit off and potentially armed. We were basically getting called in from the HQ to say be very careful because this situation feels a bit weird and this person may potentially be hostile. Apparently some people had been really scared of this person who encountered them. They said they wouldn't talk sense when they're encountered, and they would have something in their hand at all times, often concealed in their jacket. So yeah, that was what I had to investigate. I didn't feel very confident in doing so, and to be honest I was pretty annoyed because the day was going very well up until this point. So, with not much of a choice, I set out looking for this person, thinking maybe they're completely deranged and we can try and get them somewhere to get help. So I begin. Now as I set out, the snow clouds have formed again, but there's not really much snow now. I make my way across the main path and I can see that there's no other footprints around here, so obviously there's nobody else about, which is quite a good thing for me. I start to head downhill and the trees around me are absolutely massive. The good thing is it blocks any wind perfectly, so I'm not actually too cold. Plus where I am, if I start sliding and falling it'll be quite funny because I'll go quite far before I stop, but I'll cover lots of ground that way. I mean man, I'm almost half tempted to do it because it'll make my search much quicker. Now, while I'm walking, I notice there's some strange markings on some of the trees. They look similar to our own ones, which mark the path that people go onto, but they're subtly different. It's almost like somebody's tried to copy our version, or it's like a fake version, which somebody's just spray painted onto the trees without a stencil. It's pretty weird. I call into the base and ask if we put any new ones down, and they confirm that there shouldn't be anything here. That's a little odd. I think maybe, just maybe, someone was here and was using it as a marker to find the way back to civilization if needed, but I can't really be too sure. So I make a mental note of it and continue walking, and then I find another marker which is really strange. I get just past the second one, and I realise one of the trees has fallen recently. I get right up to the bottom of it, and there's some axe marks there. This is weird because this area is pretty well protected and I know you definitely can't do that. I start to think maybe these people were doing some illegal logging and they don't want to be caught. Yeah, it makes more sense to me now. I know I have to be cautious because some of these guys are a little bit crazy where I live, and I don't know, living out in the isolation and snow can really take its toll on you if you're not prepared for it. But looking around I can see the snowfall's still fresh, so there's nothing really to worry about. For some reason in this moment I felt relatively lonely. I don't know why, I just felt it suddenly. It was kind of hard to describe. It felt basically like I was miles and miles away from people, which is really bizarre because usually I never feel this out here. Yes, I'm only a radio away from help, but that doesn't make you feel close to people here. I'm suddenly interrupted as another one of these markings comes parallel to our own ones, the sort of fake version that I saw before. That's really odd. Maybe they were marking trees that they wanted to cut down, but if this was the case, they were absolutely crazy to mark it next to where they know that we're going. Again, something that doesn't make sense. I can see another one just off another tree parallel to the original one I saw it on, and I think this is really weird. I know that I have to keep moving now and try and cover some new ground, but I'm not feeling very confident. I eventually break away into a new area which is away from where those markers are, and I actually start to feel a lot better. I'm being very careful of where I'm going because it's very easy to get lost in situations like these. Another thing you have to be careful of is If you slip and fall, you can really easily get hurt, and people don't consider that if you don't move much trying to tend to a wound, you can get cold very quickly, so I'm very cautious of this. I keep checking in on my radio periodically just so the team back at the base know that I'm okay. I ask if anyone else has seen anything and I get negative. This is strange. Now, just as I round the corner, I can suddenly see somebody standing dead still in the centre of the path. They're not moving at all, and strangely don't seem to have noticed me. I can also see them holding something in their hands. Thinking it's one of the other guys out here working with me, I quickly put a radio call across, and then they say nobody's here but you, just be cautious, okay? I say Roger, and call out to the person. I say, hey, I'm here to help you, are you okay? And there's nothing. I say it again, I'm here to help you, and I don't hear a thing. The weirdest thing is that this person doesn't move whatsoever. They literally just stand there completely still, holding whatever it is up ahead of me. Now, I'm getting a little bit worried now, but I have to go forward to investigate. I mean, it's literally a part of my job. For some reason, when I start to advance, the trees feel somehow more menacing than before. I know this person hasn't come off the path because from where I'm standing I can't see any footprints in the snow, so that leads me to my next question for myself. Where did this person come from? I call out hey one more time, somewhat quieter. Not because I'm scared, just because I've advanced a bit further, but this person just stays there, completely still. I then decide just to stay still for a moment, and almost in sync with me, this person just walks off, absolutely ignoring me and the situation almost, which is really bizarre. They go slightly towards a bend and I realise I'm not going to be able to see them soon. It kind of goes up a hill on the left side so you can't really see. There is a large clearing to the right, which is where a frozen lake is, but I'm not going to go there and I know this person isn't. Now with the person out of sight, I felt a little bit more safe and continue onwards. I stop every few seconds and just rest on a tree and try and look for any movement because I don't know if this person is alone or not. When I do so, I don't see much of anything. Now I decide to move to the lake. I can see some tracks here too, like somebody's been skiing or on sleds or something. And I realise that I've got a pretty good vantage point here. I realise that if I continue walking, I should be able to see everything. I'm unsure what to do because I don't know how well frozen that the lake is, so I decide it's best to leave it. As I turn on my heel, the pressure confirms that with a loud crack sound. It's actually quite annoying for me at the time because it makes it easy for the person to know where I am. So anyway, I eventually make it up to where this person should have been, and I can't find much of anything. There are more tracks that lead off into the woods, and I decide that I'm going to have to follow it. Just as I go to turn in the direction where I think the person's gone, I see something on the floor which looks really odd. I can't be certain, but I see something that looks just like blood, and a couple of drips of it. So that only means one of two things, either this person's bleeding or an animal is, and neither are good because A, it would mean there's some kind of illegal hunting, or B, the person's in some kind of trouble and might need some help, or C, I don't know what it is, and that's what my mind went to. Annoyingly, it's my job now to follow the tracks and go into the direction where the blood is, but not before I radio in what's happening. My team says that they're gonna triangulate my position somewhat, and they're gonna send some other guys over, which actually makes me more confident. Again, my team tells me that I must proceed with caution because help isn't that close, and I'm out on my own here. I say Roger and continue. Upon my walk, I realise more of these strange markings around. I decide that I should try and count however many there are just so I can report it to the guys later, but I now avoid this and the well-trodden path. I now go into the world as I follow in the footprints of this person who I can't seem to make contact with. Now, I begin following the tracks for a little while. I must have done so for a good 10 minutes and I don't seem to be getting any closer, which is really odd. Until suddenly, I can just about make out another silhouette further up the path from me. This one doesn't seem to be moving too much. Again, I think this is really strange because there shouldn't really be anyone else out here, and it looks different from the person that I've seen before. It's strange because they seem to vanish off into the trees too. I now see something again which makes my heart skip a beat. There's more blood. There's blood where this person was too, and I can see it from some kind of snowshoe. You know when you can see the footprint of something? Although this one had spikes from obviously being adapted to cold weather. There was a bloody footprint which was leading off further away from me, different from what I'd seen before. The footprints didn't match, and that's really odd. Unsure whether it is an injured person walking around or I just don't know what was happening, I radio it in again, but unfortunately it doesn't go through because the area that I've went to has hills which are basically blocking my radio from working. So now I've got a dilemma. I can go in one of two directions here. I can try and follow the first person or the second. I opt for following the second person. I let out one call trying to get their attention, but nobody replies again. I then decide to follow the footprints, and just before I set off, I can see a silhouette again up on the bridge. Now they've rested something on the side of the bridge, but I can't really see what this is. I pick up the pace a little bit and feel more brave now as I go to investigate what's happening. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm well trained for situations, but I'm really becoming further and further out of my depth here, especially because I don't actually know the territory too well. I eventually get up to the bridge and I can see something resting on it. I can then see lots of blood dripped onto the bottom of something. I then get closer and to my horror, I realise that it's an axe and there's blood dripping from the tip of it. And it looks very fresh. Weirdly, I also can't see any other footprints as I take a moment to look around. I don't know where this person has gone, and I sure as hell don't want to find out anytime soon, but I have to. And then realise that this crazy person must have gone into the flowing stream now. To give you an idea of how insane that is, if you fall in here for less than a minute, you're pretty much dead, and that's just what this person seems to have done. Now, I was excited to at least have some kind of lead, but I knew it's going to be very dangerous to follow them around here. That only means one thing though, that they must have went downstream. Thank God I managed to get radio signal again, and I call in exactly what's happened. And they say they're going to get the police involved, and they say you can head back or keep following, it's up to you. I then somewhat stupidly say that I'm going to head back, but decide to investigate a little bit more. I've realised that maybe a crime's just been committed, or at the very least I've killed some kind of animal and I need to at least help. Maybe that was the other person earlier that I saw, I don't know. I head back, now going slightly off the course again, and follow the stream downhill. I follow this until eventually I can see some more footprints leading into the forest once more. I can then see a trail of blood, and I seem to be getting closer because the tracks seem more and more fresh. Just as I think I'm onto a lead, I hear somebody scream out. Now this is an absolutely belching, blood-curdling scream, something like I've never really heard before. It almost doesn't sound human, it was that bad. I then round a corner and I can see what only looks like a crime scene from a horror movie. There's blood everywhere and multiple trees knocked over, and scratching marks on some of the trees. I've never seen anything like it. It literally looked like somebody had been mauled by a bear. Now, what really scared me is that I didn't hear that scream once again. I looked around and I can't see any more tracks, and I'm met with this deep fear in my belly, and my lips go dry as my saliva dries up. I look around and I really can't find any source or body as to what's happened out here. That's what really confuses me. I expected to find a wounded person here that I'd be able to medevac, but nothing. Realizing that I've seen enough and starting to feel very sick, I decide that I'm gonna have to trek back the way that I've come. But now I realize I'm just a little bit lost, and I don't know what to do. I decide the best thing to do is have a quick look around to see if there's anybody dying, but there's literally no one. I then realize that I'm probably in a weird situation now, and once again, I hear another sound. This one's completely different. I hear my own name. Thinking it's one of the other workers here, I say, "Oh, thank God you're here. Come help me quick." And then, I can see a figure just off in the distance in all black slowly raising their finger up to their lips to be quiet. A gesture that spoke thousands of words to me, and the most important one was to run. I then turn around, and before you knew it, I was heading back where I'd come from. This wasn't one of the guys I worked with, and this definitely wasn't somebody in trouble. This was something completely different. Somebody was trying to trap me then or there, or somehow wanted me to see whatever had just happened. Now, I can never be sure where the source of the blood was, but that person didn't seem to have any on them. I can only imagine that they caused it. I jogged for probably 15 minutes before making it back to one of the main trail paths. I stupidly fell into a frozen over puddle and get very wet, and that annoys me because I think I'm going to start getting frostbite on my toes, and I don't want to lose any toes, but it feels like it's going to happen. I now, funnily enough, have to walk across some boards and bits of wood over some water, which is hideously dangerous, but I don't really have much of a choice now. I sprint, and then I see another body. This time, paralyzed with fear, I drop down to the ground and wait. This person's looking around, and I realize that something's different this time. I put my radio onto the lowest volume it goes, and I make contact and say, "Are you there?" And thankfully, they put the radio up to their ear. I say, "Hey, I'm right next to you, and is this?" and one of the other workers' names. But strangely, they don't reply. Thinking maybe I've gone through to the wrong person, I switch channels a couple of times and make it through. I then ask them for the location, and to my horror, they're in a complete different place to me. I then see the person up ahead of me put the radio down and continue walking with something in their hands. They were dressed in camouflage, basically a white sniper suit kind of thing. This is not something we would wear. They were trying not to be seen. I don't know how long I was on the ground for, but it was cold enough that I couldn't feel my hands and feet. I slowly get up and start to kind of crawl like they do in the military through the woods for a bit longer. I managed to make it out to one more clearing, and then I sprint for a good another 10 minutes. My feet are burning now, and my eyes actually hurt from being out in the snow for so long. I sprint and eventually call in for help, and I ask for a proximity of the closest next worker to me, of which is given. Now, seeing this person just coming up over the horizon is like something I'll never forget. I've never felt such relief in my life. almost like I'd become accustomed to the tension and forgot how it was to feel normal. I run over to them and I quickly blurt out everything that's happened, and I have to stop a few times and repeat myself because I'm not really talking cohesively. I then explain there's lots of people out there and I think something horrible's happened. This worker then informs me that the police are also dealing with this situation and there's quite a big search, and he quickly takes me over to his truck and gets me warm again. I sit there drinking coffee with him for a little bit as we listen on the radio, and we hear one of the law enforcement say that they've located a body. That was enough to send chills down my spine, and suddenly I didn't feel so warm from the coffee. A couple of hours later, I have to give a statement to the police of what happened, and can you believe this? They thought I might have been one of the suspects. It was only after I gave my full statement that they realised it wasn't my fault. I then say to them, "What did you find?" And they don't tell me too much, but they just say that they found a body that they're trying to identify, and they were murdered with definitely some kind of blunt weapon like an axe. I then explain exactly where it should be, and they say to leave the rest with them. We did eventually get an update from the law enforcement who says that other than finding the body, they went to that exact bridge and couldn't find any forensics, and also not the axe. That was to my absolute shock, because I saw it right there with my own eyes. They say they saw some footprints leading off of the trail and into the water, but not much else. They think somebody gone back there to clean up the scene. And shockingly, they never found the blood site that I found myself. My work were very supportive and understood why I needed a long time off, and thankfully supported me in changing jobs. It's something I don't really like thinking about much to this day, but from the conversations with my bosses and law enforcement, we think that there are a couple of killers out there who were targeting the hiker who they managed to get, then also myself, and they were using radios to communicate with each other to find me, and I must have just escaped. It's something that still haunts me to this day, and I know it's something I'll never forget. How could I? Red River Gorge is a beautiful and huge park full of wildlife, rock climbing, waterfalls and dense forests, gorges and beautiful views. The place feels truly isolated, disconnected from the rest of the world. One evening, my boyfriend D and I decided to go camping at the gorge. We went out and tried to find a campground that was as backwards as possible. Sites were spread far from each other. Our site, that was on the edge of a very steep drop-off. We arrived at sunset and quickly set up. By the time we're fully set up, the sun had set, and we began making a fire. About 20 minutes into relaxing, we began to hear howling that doesn't go away, and it doesn't sound like it's far from us. We're both freaked out by the realization that there were wolves nearby, but we tried to not overreact and continued to sit by our fire. 10 minutes later, I start hearing a faint yelling about 15 feet away past the cliff's edge. Now, I told Dee to be quiet and listen, and we're both frozen out of fear. A woman was now screaming. I couldn't make out any words at that point, but it was a deep, gurgling shriek. A noise that I've never heard a person make in my life before. Then I heard it. She was screaming, "Help, please someone help. Someone please help me," repeating this over and over again, howling at the top of her lungs. I'm terrified. She could have been turned around in the dark and fallen off the cliff. She could have been attacked by wolves or a bear or bitten by a snake. At this point we both sprinted into my car, frantically climbing inside, locking the doors. I tried calling the police but have no service. I threw the car in reverse and sped down the dirt road to find anyone that could help. The shrieks continued. I didn't make it far before I found 3 young men standing on the edge of the forest. I slowed down and cracked my window, still hearing that woman begging for help, and asking the men if they heard that. How could they have not heard it? I told them it was a young woman screaming in the forest. Then, 2 of them went sprinting into the darkness. Without questioning me or anything, the other one just stood by my car, assuring me he had no idea what was happening. While the 2 men were somewhere in the forest, I drove further down the dirt road until I found a spot to turn around at. When I came back, the screaming had stopped, and the men were back by the side of the road. I slowed down and asked them where the woman was, and one of the men that had run into the woods said, "Don't worry, it was actually just a kid messing around." I just said okay. I drove back as quickly as possible. We left the campsite and went straight home. Once out of the woods, we called the local police station multiple times to no answer. I know it wasn't a child. I've never heard such primal screams in my life. It made my skin crawl and my heart race just thinking about it. What did those men do that night? What was I a witness to? I live just where farmland meets the edge of the suburbia, on an island off the coast of BC. The climate here is sub-temperate rainforest, so the natural and untouched landscape is incredibly wild, dense and lush. I'm keen on endurance cycling, and I take full advantage of the trail network in the forest surrounding my area. I work long hours, so most of my winter rides are in complete darkness with my trusty trail light. One section of my home trail winds through a rainforest bog full of hundreds of trees. They're huge. It's absolutely beautiful in daytime. It feels like a magical place with shafts of sunlight piercing the fog, hundreds of different species of flora, and there's so many wild animals out there. It's really beautiful. Now at nights, my gut starts tightening as the thought of passing through this mile-long section of trail appears. One day about a year ago, I was lucky enough to get a chance to go for a ride through it, so I took it. It was cold and very rainy, with few other people out on the trail. I had packed thermos of hot coffee in my backpack, and I thought the rainforest-style bog was the best place to take a rest as any. Now, I chill out. I have an interest in botany, so I was looking closely at the lynches growing off of the huge Douglas fir. But suddenly, I felt distinctly not alone. No biggie. Lots of people use the trail, although not many are out there that day because the weather's so wet and cold. And that's when I heard it. A meow. That's odd because this isn't a good place for a cat to be alone. We have cougars and bears, but I hear a meow again. Except this time, it was canned and robotic sounding, like somebody playing a bad audio file of a cat. My gut starts to clench. It just sounded wrong somehow, and I can't figure out why. My hands were shaking when I unzipped my backpack to put my coffee thermo back in. I felt waves of nausea roll over me, and the air suddenly felt dense and thick. I was in a rainforest surrounded by trees and moss, but I felt like I can't get enough oxygen. I hadn't seen anyone for at least 10 miles, and I was distinctly aware of how far I was, and I couldn't really get any cell reception here either. Now, I hear the same meow again, but this time closer. I've never heard a cat like this before. It sounded like an imitation of a cat or a person saying meow. It was so tiny, cold and robotic. I now know that without hesitation, it's time for me to go immediately. I was panicked on the inside, but can't show fear, so I casually slung my leg over my bike and start riding. As soon as I got out of the bog, I ride the rest of the way home like a bat out of hell. glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. I can't see anything. I will never forget this experience for as long as I live. I've had some pretty disturbing things happen on my night rides, but nothing ever like this. I hate the fact that clearly something was imitating a cat, and I'm sure it was a recording. God knows who was out that deep into the forest too. I just hope I don't encounter this again. I used to love going for long hikes in the forest near where I live. I usually did it on summer's evenings. Yeah, I know this probably isn't the safest thing to do, but I always had my hunting rifle on me anyway. I mean, I'd be stupid not to. All it takes is one wild animal to go for you, and if you're unarmed, good luck to you. So anyway, I set out one summer's evening. I had my iPod playing some really chill songs and I felt really good about myself. I can't really get cell phone signal where I go because the trees cover it, but I like listening to my music. Now I was a good 40 minutes into my hike. There was enough moonlight for me to see where I was going. That's how I normally planned my hikes, when the moon was out of its brightest on the most clear days, so I can see everything. I'm really enjoying myself this night. I found true tranquility. I decided to stop for a minute, take off my headphones, and just pour out some of the hot chocolate I had in my flask. Now the second I do this, I have the feeling that I'm not alone, and I can't describe this feeling. It's almost like I'm comfortable in my own presence, but I don't want to be joined by anyone else, and this unsettles me. I just think I'm just being a little paranoid. I say to myself, thank God I've got my rifle, and I could have sworn I heard a laugh afterwards. No, it must have been just an animal, surely. So I go about drinking my hot chocolate. As I do so, and I'll never forget this, I hear someone whisper behind me, "Mind if I have some?" And a terrifying laugh follow. Now the next few seconds is a complete blur as I fumble, fall over getting up, grab my rifle, and scream myself and sprint in the complete opposite direction to where I heard the voice and back onto the trail. I try and scream out that I have a gun, but I can't get the words out. What's worse is I hear rustling behind me. I continue sprinting up the trail, only to slip temporarily again, and now on my back. I lay there wondering whether it's better to pretend I'm still. I look behind me, and I can see what appears to be the butt of a cigarette lit in the distance. Well, looks like I'm going to keep moving then. I get up again, and scream I have a gun and I'm not afraid to use it. What's worse, I'm sure I hear laughter in the distance after saying this. I sprint all the way back to my car. I don't even bother going back for my flask for anything. I immediately get on my radio and call it into the park rangers in the area, who say they're going to check it out and they want me to show them exactly where it is. I say you've got no chance and speed out of there. And the whole drive home, I can't stop thinking, who in their right mind was out there? How long were they stalking me for, and what on earth did they want? They clearly weren't mentally sane, whoever or whatever this was. Now I don't believe in the paranormal, but this could have easily been something like that, because why would you be out there with no torch or anything? Maybe it is an insane person. All I know is that I never got to the bottom of it, and I never went out on my own in the woods at night again. I come from a big country family. We live on a farm. We raise our own food and meat animals, and we hunt and process. My dad's first cousin is even a licensed taxidermist, so we get a lot of hunting in. For a bit of backstory, on the homestead I grew up on and that we still live in, it was my parents, my pop's first cousin and his wife. me and my 4 sisters, and my 4 female second cousins. So 4 adults and 9 kids. And sometimes my pop's brothers come to stay with us too, especially during the hunting season. So hunting season is on, and my pops and his brother and the cousins we live with are all getting ready to go hunting. Some of the kids decide to tag along with me, my sister and my cousin. We get permission from one of my uncle's friends to hunt his lands away, and it's basically on several hundreds of acres of forest. Now, an important fact: during the time we're setting up, my pops and uncles are quiet while the 3 of us kids talk, and my voice hasn't changed. This is important. Us kids keep chatting away while the adults are just getting louder and feeling more energy while they check out the survival equipment, making sure the guns are clean and working, etc. Now there's a rustling in the thick brush around us, and suddenly 3 creepy looking guys enter the clearing. They literally stop dead. One of them has a hand on his knife on his belt. They're clearly drunk as hell. They kept looking between A and S and my pops and uncle, like debating something. My pops and uncle stand up. Last bit of backstory: every guy in my family is huge. I'm 19 and 6'5". My dad is 6'10" and 280 pounds. Jesus. Just deeply intimidating men. And so are my uncles. The guys laugh nervously as my Uncle V picks up one of his rifles, pointing it at them. The dudes start running off into the clearing like the devil's after them. My pops immediately says we're clearing out. My uncles don't question it, and neither do we. We're freaking out, and we're totally scared now. I mean, we're taking things down really sloppily, but my pops doesn't say anything about us messing up the camping equipment. When we get back, we instantly call the police, who unfortunately don't take it serious. We also told the owner of the land to be careful with his kids. The craziest thing is that, at that moment I realised A and S and me, with my unchanged voices, are the only voices that these guys would have heard. So they clearly come across here, trying to find some children on their own. Just down the road from where I lived a few years ago, in southeast Australia, is an opening into about 100 acres of woodlands and bush that I frequently went into when I was younger to do the usual things, riding and camping, etc. I was out driving at around 11:30 with my girlfriend, and as we're in the area, I decided to show her the woodlands while we sat in the area, as she enjoys everything to do with nature. And it's still summer, so it's an extremely warm night. I left my car with the light shining into the trees as we weren't going too far in, and it was pitch black inside, and the 2 of us just kind of sat around chatting and just relaxing. She was sitting on a sort of map of the area that had been used before, and there was some plastic around us. I kept getting this feeling like we're being watched though. Now I've read on here a few people have said that they felt like they're in danger, although nothing around them was off. Everything was fine, apart from the feeling I had, and I just can't explain it. After lighting another cigarette, my nerves are calmed. I scanned the tree line again and realised that it looked different than before. It was only after starting into the dark that I saw that there was now moonlight lighting up all around us, and I can see a black shape blocking where we come from before. This I didn't see before. I've got goosebumps just typing this, but the only way to describe it is that all sound just ceased and everything went dead silent for a few seconds. I had this disgusting feeling of dread coming over me as I saw motion in the dark path, as something literally crawls towards us on all fours. Now I've seen nearly every animal in the outback here, and we don't have any large predators like in the US or Europe, but somehow I knew this thing was a predator, and it wasn't hiding from us, and it starts slowly coming towards us, clearly hunting. Now I don't know if my girlfriend saw it or not, as it was kind of dark, but I saw that thing get off on its two legs, just staring at us. Now I'm 6'4", and this thing was about another half-meter larger than me, with arms that were far too long. I mean, they're literally reaching the ground. I'm terrified now. All I can make out was an off-white, almost yellowish fur colour it had, and a strange wolf-like head. I wasn't able to move as it stared at me, but it's at this point that my girlfriend gasped, which seems to break the silence between us. I grab her arm, and we sprint to the car, slam into the doors. This thing is tearing after us too. We both screamed. We tear out of there quick, not even looking back. It took us half an hour to calm down enough to talk about what we had seen. We both discussed it many times and know what we saw wasn't fake. We still have no explanation to it to this day. It's really scared me, and I've never went back to that area since. I always used to go camping a few years ago. I stopped doing it as much recently because of work, but I still get out there on the odd occasion, and I love it. I never had anything weird happen to me while I was actually camping. Some of the strangest things would happen when I was driving. It was never too bad. I'd just see strange lights in the sky, but I was sure that was just because I was tired. There was one thing I could never explain though, however. So I was driving back from a camping trip one summer's evening when I see somebody standing in the road. I don't know what they're doing, so I slowly drive up to them. They're not facing me, they're facing directly away from me. I turn my lights on to try and let them know that I'm there, but they don't move. I stop my car and get out and I say, "Hey bud, I need you to move out of the road for me please, is everything okay?" And I'm not kidding you, the second I finish my sentence, they fall to the ground. Well, I say they, all of their clothes do. It's almost like somebody just disappeared. I rub my eyes and I'm sure that I'm just sleep deprived and hallucinating, and I get back in my truck and slowly drive towards it. To my horror, I can see only a pool of blood exactly where I thought the person was standing, but it's dried blood like it's been there for weeks. I have no idea what it is. I immediately do a U-turn, scream to myself for what felt like an eternity, and get the hell out of there. To this day, I still have no idea what happened or who that was. There was nowhere for them to have run, and if they did, I would have saw footsteps in the dirt. There was neither. The drive home from work was always a long one for me. I had to drive through miles of woodland roads completely on my own. It was about an hour's drive, but I got used to it. I used to get finished on my night shift at about 10 o'clock, and I'd always turn on the radio and just enjoy my drive. There was one cold winter's night in December that really shook me up though, however. So I'm about 10 minutes into the drive, trying to demist my dashboard, when suddenly I have a feeling come over me like I'm being watched, and I can't shake it. It's a weird feeling, but it went away after a few minutes, and as I'm driving, I suddenly realise that I've lost my power steering. That's odd. It normally comes on again if this happens, which it rarely does, but then I see my lights go off and my engine cut out. It was almost like somebody let off an EMP in the atmosphere. Everything just stops, and I crawl to a halt. I'm confused out of my mind, but I'm not scared. Now as I'm sitting there, I become aware of just how dark it is around me. It's literally pitch black because of the trees. 10 seconds later, the radio comes on, and I can hear a staticky voice saying, "Please don't be scared." And suddenly, my engine comes back on without me turning the ignition, and everything else goes back to normal. Needless to say that I was terrified in this moment. I drive back home as quick as I possibly can. Nothing like it ever happened since, and I still have no explanation to it to this day. I grew up in the South. There's tons and tons of beautiful places to see that haven't been taken over by concrete yet. It's nice. But along with that, it's pretty boring. Being a teenager and wanting to go out and have fun led to mostly improvising with your buddies and hoping that something good can come out of the night. There wasn't really a local spot to go and hang out at, like a club or cool bar, and the places that were close to us were boring, because we'd went to them so often. I'm sure if you've ever lived in a rural area, you can understand it. Something that I found a ton of enjoyment in as a teen was just cruising around super late at night listening to music. I would fill up my gas tank, grab something to drink, and I'd just drive off until the sun comes up. It was a way to clear my head and relax. Those country roads are always fun to drive down at 2 AM, and was just also the right amount of spooky. I don't know why that made me laugh. Well, one night, I absolutely got more than I bargained for. I can't remember what month it was exactly, but I knew for a fact it was in the summertime, because I was out of school, and I also remember it being a comforting, chilled night. So, if I was to guess, it was probably around July or August. I was cruising around like I always did, and was completely worry-free. I had music blaring, and I'm in my zone. I decided to head down and park just out of boredom. This particular park is at the end of a very long stretch of desolated country road, but is a really pretty drive because of that. When I say desolate country road, I don't mean that it's some dirt road that goes through the woods or anything crazy. It's a normal paved road, but there really is nothing on it after a certain point. The entire road takes about 20 minutes to drive down, and to get to the park after about 10 minutes into the drive. That's where the houses start spreading out further and further before there's none, and just a road leading to a park. I think a lot of the reason I like this drive is, at night, it's so creepy, and there's really no getting over that. I love the adventure of it. Now, the park isn't open for camping or anything. It's mostly just lots of land with walking trails and biking trails set up through miles of woodland. So obviously at around 3 AM in the morning, it's pretty dead. I made it there and just did a slow normal loop around the park. The night before it stormed so badly, so I remember my parents and I had to take shelter because of the threat of a tornado. There ended up being no tornado, but the storms were pretty rough. Because of it, I come up on a fallen tree in the road that looped around to the exit of the park that must have been caused by the storm. It wasn't some massive tree or anything, but I knew for a fact that there was no way it could have gotten there from a car, obviously. It was pitch black, everywhere besides the front of my car because of my headlights, and because of that, I immediately ruled out backing up the entire way. I just drove when I entered the park. I knew that this was super dangerous and there was no way. At this point on the road, there was flat land on each side of me. I figured that it would make the most sense just to back up to the grass beside me, just a little, and then drive back the way I come. It was a one-way loop around the park, but I wasn't really worried about going out in the wrong way because it's so late. So now I start to back off the road so I can get my car to turn around. All was good until I pull off onto the road. I totally didn't take into account how wet the grass was and the amount of mud there is. My car went absolutely nowhere. My back tyres are completely stuck and were spinning in places where I didn't think they could. I start getting scared now. It really isn't the most ideal of situations to be in. I immediately take my cell phone out of my pocket and saw that I had service, which comes as a massive relief. I call my parents and tell them what's happening and where I was. I'm pretty annoyed, but they said that they're going to pay for the tow truck to get me. My parents both drove their small 4-door sedans, and they said that they would be zero help in the situation that I'm in. It was about 45 minutes away from my home and most of human civilization, so I was pretty sure I'm going to be stuck there for at least an hour before someone comes to get me. It's a freaky feeling. But I try getting out of my head and just continue listening to music and playing on my phone. There's not really a lot I can do. After I kind of calmed down from the initial anger I had, I started to check out my surroundings. I didn't even notice at first because everything's going on, but in front of my car's placement was a field that's full of deer. It's the most I've ever seen in my life. There legitimately must have been 40 deer just walking around eating grass. The field wasn't directly in front of my car, but if I was to get out and throw a rock, I would have easily hit one. So if I'm gonna guess, they're probably about 30 yards away. I watch him for a little bit, but I'm quickly over it and start browsing through my socials on my phone. They seem to have been over it quicker than I was because they all go back to eating grass after figuring out I'm not going to attack them. After browsing my phone for 15 minutes, I finally get a call back from my parents letting me know that the tow truck guy's coming. He's about an hour and a half away. Still to this day, I remembered hearing that and thinking, "You've got to be kidding me." I understood that me and only me is the reason that I'm in this situation, so I can't complain. But I mean, come on. I decide that the smartest thing to do now is to make sure all the doors are locked and lay back and sleep for a bit. So that's what I do. Okay, here we go. So I wake up 45 minutes later to the feeling of being watched. I'm not sure if anyone has ever experienced it before. I don't know how common it is, but it's almost like a sixth sense was going off in my head telling me I need to wake up. Now. Waking up to that feeling in that situation is horrifying. I sit up and immediately check my surroundings to see nothing. I look through my car very quickly for any kind of weapon and find a pocket knife. A pocket knife. Great. I'm really scared now, even though I haven't saw or heard from anyone. I was shocked to see that the field of deers in front of me was still full. I don't know anything about the animal, but I guess they were just gonna move. But they're motionless. I call my parents back to see if they've heard anything. I decide not to mention how scared I am because I know it's gonna worry them. And there's no updates from the tow truck guy, so this can't be much worse. The last call just lasted a few minutes, and I felt like an idiot. They both had to wake up for work quickly after, and now they spent over $100 to try and get me home, and they're worried about me. We hung up, and I looked up from the phone, and immediately went from 0 to 100 in a panic. All of the deer in front of me had perked up, staring in the same direction in front of them. Every single one of them. One of them stopped dead in their tracks, standing completely still. The others followed, looking at something. I put my high beams on and stared, waiting for absolutely anything to happen. But there's nothing. I tap my horn real quick. They don't even budge. That's what scares me. They were completely glued to what was in front of them instead of being scared by me. I know they were looking into the woods, but where I was, I can only see them. I can hear my heartbeat, and I grabbed my pocket knife and just waited for something to happen. I would say it was about a minute after I honked. Every single one of them in unison ran the opposite direction that I'm in. And now within 10 seconds, it's completely empty with just me in the field. I'm petrified in fear. I knew that staying in my car would be the safest thing, but I'm now stuck. My head is on a swivel. I'm freaking out in every possible way. I assumed that it's a bear or something, but it could have been absolutely anything. I was convinced at that point that it's the devil himself. I don't know what to do now. I knew that the tow truck was close by, but I have no idea where. I start shaking because of nerves, and just look around me to make sure nothing was by me, and focusing on the field in front of me. I did this for what felt like an actual eternity, sitting in complete silence and darkness in the middle of nowhere, waiting for something to jump out and attack me. Now 15 of the longest minutes of my life go by, and I start to see lights break through the tree line on the road. As it gets closer, I see it's a tow truck guy. The lights on in his truck feel like Jesus coming. He gets up to me and I jump out of the car and say, "Do you have a gun?" I tell him what's happened and he said something's definitely nearby. He let me know that he grabbed his shotgun in the truck and assured me that it's probably a bear or bobcat. He gave me the whole, "They're more scared of you than you're of them" crap. The tree was small enough for him to sort of bulldoze it out of the way and hooked up my car. He wasn't really listening to what I was saying about the story, but knew I was shaken up from it. The whole time, I still had my eyes glued on the field looking for anything. He was completely done with everything in about 15 minutes, and he told me that to follow his truck out of there and onto the main road's the best bet. I got in my car and was ready more than anything to get out of there. We start to move away from the spot I'm in, and I still have my head on a swivel, completely shaken up. As we're driving away, I look in my rear view, and just out of the way, I could see the partially lit up spot where I was from the vehicle lights. I watch in my rear view mirror as a man comes out of the tree line behind my car and walks into the middle of the road watching us. He's a huge person too. My heart stops. I legitimately start bawling out of fear. I can't see any details of the man. I don't care about that, honestly. The feeling when we're driving away was the worst of my life. He stands there the whole time. Now he was there watching me, creeping up on me when I'm completely alone for a very long time. Maybe even coming up to my window watching me sleep. That's a feeling that I can't quite put into words. The entire time we're driving off, as long as I can see him, he doesn't move. He just watches. A million things are racing through my mind now. I was scared that there might have been multiple people waiting for us. I was trying to figure out if I should start beating on my horn or what. I decide all I want to do though is get out of there, more than anything. The second we finally got out of the park and was able to be on two roads, I drive past the tow truck driver doing at least 70 miles per hour. I run inside, quickly saying sorry to my parents and nothing more, run into my room, not sleeping for a single second that night. I was searching everywhere for what could have happened, escaped convicts, whatever, and I've come to the conclusion that I'm never going to know who was out there or what they were planning to do to me. I never told my parents this story either until years after, and it freaked them out when I told them it, even in my older age. I never went back to that park ever again, and I never will for as long as I live. Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night. As my friends and I are quite the night owls, we love the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the roads or the paths we frequented. Even when using main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out, so late in such a rural area. And you could see or hear them coming from very far away due to their headlights and the noise of the vehicle disrupting the peace. We were really into it at the time, and would often ride our boards for miles and miles, not seeing anyone until the sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads to take one of our favourite hidden routes. It began with a narrow, paved path that was the only piece of land separating two sides of a long lake. It would often sink under due to rain, and we wanted to seize the opportunity to use it before it rained and went underwater again. It was roughly 2 miles long and extremely relaxing to ride through due to scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to keep moving and continue on our way and turn into a very close path that leads into a densely wooded area of a national park. As we came up to the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what appeared to be a tiny ball of light moving down there. At first we think it's a park ranger, but it moves so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what it is. Rather than shine our flashlights down, we curiously watched out for a few moments, whispering to each other what it could be. And all at once, that small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud revving sounds. Overwhelming our senses as to become accustomed to the darkness and silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off the path into a very dark, very overgrown hole in the side of a hill overlooking where we just come from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout of this hill, hoping the plants and darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was happening out there. We watched our pursuers ride out to where we originally were standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4-wheelers, 2 on motorbikes, each other yelling something, but we can't make out what they're saying due to the distance. We felt safe enough to whisper softly to each other and speculate who these people could have been. Our first thought was that they might be park rangers of some kind, although we've never seen any in here, and we've been here a lot of times. And honestly, we doubted that this country had the budget for them this deep, unless they're on a big manhunt or something, which has happened in neighbouring states. Besides, these men are on vehicles that are inappropriate for paved bike trails. They're very angry too, and we don't know why. They call out for us for a while, yelling things like, "We know you're there, and we can see you, come out." We stay silent and decide to call on their bluffing instead of running. Eventually, I heard one of the men yell, "Find them now," and smash a bottle. That had erased any hope that they're rangers. We watched them split up, and each of them gone a different way down a series of paths on their vehicles, including the one that we've just come from. It took us what felt like ages to move. We're frozen in fear in that dugout, watching the lights from the vehicles travelling through the woods and paths. One of them already come in full circle and passing the point that we started on. I thought about calling for help, but I was too afraid. I was scared that the smallest amount of sound would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach our furthest distance yet, we finally summoned the nerve to get up and to run somewhere far enough away from them to make a call. We ran as hard and fast as we can through the woods, since their headlights gave their locations away on the paths. We would hide again whenever we felt like they're close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woodland became less dense, and the fear is overwhelming. Finally though, we emerged from the woods onto the intersection of the 2 main roads, far enough away from where we started. We ducked down into the ditch to call for help. I opened my phone. I noticed I had recent missed calls from one of our friends, Connor, who we're supposed to meet up with after our longboarding excursion. I called him and frantically asked where he is. Luck's with us again. And he hadn't given up on our plans despite us ignoring him. He's only a few miles away now, already heading in our direction. I gave him the names of 2 of the streets we're near. I explained that we need to be picked up immediately. He agrees to speed over to us while Justin and I were waiting and hiding. Thankfully, Connor arrived before any of them men did. We bolted into the back seat of his car, yelling for him to get out of there. He took off fast. Relief doesn't begin to explain how I felt after being safely driven home. After explaining everything that happened to Connor, we ended up just moving on with our night and decided not to call the police. We figured they'd be gone by the time any officer made it out there, and that we're putting ourselves at risk by admitting that we were breaking the law being out there. Justin and I later admitted to each other that when the revving started, we could see our minds going to Chainsaw Killer or something worse. Frustratingly enough, whatever them weird men saw that made them want to chase us so bad, we actually never saw, so they even had no reason to chase us. I never found out what they were actually doing or why they're so angry at us. I just know we're in a very dangerous situation, and to be honest, we're probably lucky to make it out of there alive. Me and my friend John loved to go for hikes in a national park that was a couple of hours drive away from where we lived. We'd often end up camping overnight. We'd always bring our camping gear in case we didn't make it back in time off the trail when it was dark. Now, we usually did this in summer evenings. Oftentimes we'd never encounter anyone else except for the odd park ranger. It was normally nice to see them, and we'd have a good laugh for a little bit. I always respected park rangers and embraced them when I saw them. Now, we set out on this one hike during one summer's evening 2 years ago. We're having a really good time. We're just talking about life. My friend's talking about not really liking his job much, and he's complaining about the hours and the work they have him do. He works in a hospital and really doesn't enjoy it, and I felt pretty bad for him. He's only starting and they're making him do all the dirty work pretty much. I wasn't too happy in my life either at the time. I had some big changes coming, and I was waiting on people, and I hate waiting. I really can't stand it. So we're talking about this for hours, and honestly, it's like a therapy session, and I really enjoy it. We keep talking and we're talking about the highs and lows of life, things that are coming, and things that we just want to see change. We're both saying it's surprising how that this time next year, we have no idea where we're going to be or what we're going to be doing. We're just putting the work in now. As we finish talking, we realise it's nightfall and there's already moonlight illuminating around us. I love moonlight, and we say, hey, how about we set up camp? John agrees. We walk further down, and just as we think we found a good camping spot, we see another tent further up. Now there's this horrible smell there, so we're sure that whoever this is has hunted an animal, and they've left it out there, which is kind of disgusting, but they might be skinning it, getting it ready to eat. My friend goes over to say hello, and just say that not to worry about us, we're going to move further away so he can have his own space. And what do you know? A park ranger appears. You can see his hat from a mile away. As we go over there, we realise that there's something not quite right about this ranger. We can't really tell what. He doesn't have a normal uniform on. Well, he has a hat at least, but he has a big coat on. It's not cold enough for a coat. He says very few words when he speaks to us. He just says, yeah, I'm just setting up camp. We're out looking for someone, and that we should leave. I end up talking to him for a little while, and a lot of what he's saying doesn't make sense, and I get this really weird vibe from him, like he's looking at me but he's not, and he's trying to look through me at the same time, if that makes sense. He says, "Are we armed?" And we say, "Yeah, we've both got hunting rifles, but we got a permit." He asks to see it, and my buddy shows him his. He says, "That's okay, you haven't got to get yours out to me." And then John says that we need to get moving and should probably set up camp. He says fine, and the second he turns around, my buddy John grabs me hard by the arm and starts walking really fast, guiding me. Now I'm confused because, well, we're out in the middle of nowhere in a national park. There's gonna be lots of places we can go and set up our camp. But there was something different about the way he grabbed me. It felt really urgent. I can't describe it. I don't need to know any more about the situation, and I should start to lightly jog with him. The second we're away from the camp, I turn back and I can see the ranger still watching us. He's standing in the exact same spot as before though, which is something I find very odd. The second that we get over this hill, John says run, and I don't question it, and we start sprinting as fast as we can back the way we've come. He starts telling me, "I don't think that's a park ranger." I say, "What? You're kidding me?" He says, "No, just run." And we run for miles and have to stop eventually to catch up with our breaths. He says, "I don't think that was a dead animal we could smell, and that guy definitely wasn't a park ranger." I said, "How'd you know? He's just wearing a coat." He said when he looked at our permits, he didn't even look. And then he said it was fine, and a park ranger would have to check both of us had permits, pretty much. I got a horrible sinking feeling in my stomach as I remember turning round and looking at the park ranger just standing there staring at us, and a lot of what he said didn't make sense. God, it all clicked now. We continued hiking into the morning and eventually make it back to our car. We drive immediately to the park ranger station, and the park rangers there say that nobody's out in that area and they're definitely not camping. Eventually, they sent out some people to go and investigate and got the police involved. It turned out that they suspect that this guy had murdered someone, and where we encountered him, he moved everything and hid the body. The police is still out there looking for it today. Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. Make sure you check out my Patreon if you want to support my channel or if you want early access to my stories. And make sure that you check out my podcast too in the description below. I have a quick message before the stories start, so if you'd like to listen to the stories and go straight to them, there's a timestamp in the description below. So for today I'd like to share this. When things go wrong, it can be really easy to lose sight of what you're doing and your motivation. During these times, it's really important that you take control of your mind, because it's very, very easy for your mind to turn against you and make things worse. And like I've said before, oftentimes things aren't as bad as they seem. If you can't control your mind, then it's going to be a lot harder to control other things. So if you can, take time to calm yourself down and control your thoughts and start to think positive and talk to yourself positively in your head. And again, if times are going rough, remember that sometimes you just have to ride out the bad patches and just keep going. And it may be difficult and you might not be able to see the objective in your current situation or where you'd like to go, but trust me, it's there. You just need to stay positive and keep at it. And don't push yourself too hard. It's okay to have days off and just to rest and do the things you enjoy. I think when it comes to people's mental health, often they go too hard at trying to get better sometimes, and they end up feeling down if they don't get the results they want, i.e. a bad day. But don't worry, it's completely normal and a part of it. And again, remember, if you're really struggling or stressed out, for example with anxiety, it's important to think of, are there any other things that are making me cause this that might not be normal? Like if you're constantly very anxious going out meeting people and going outside generally, then you might have social anxiety or something similar. And with the right help, you can completely turn it around. Sometimes it's just important to know what's out there and what could be wrong to get the help first. Because I know some people too might be scared of any kind of description of something they might potentially have, or automatically assume they can't possibly have it. But remember, that's the wrong mindset. And if something is wrong, there's definitely ways to get better with it. So I hope that can make a difference, and I hope everyone enjoys the stories. I'll speak to you all soon. So, I worked as a camp counselor during my college years. Now, several years before, stories of things like skinwalkers become culturally commonplace. Well, certainly before I'd heard of them. Now, one year, we had a night hike activity with story stations. My station had me by myself on a cliff that overlooks a river, and about halfway through the hike, I was generally the furthest from the other staff at any given time, but because I was in charge of the nature programs, I knew the woods like the back of my hand. I wasn't frightened in the least. Unless there was a recent rain, I could usually get to and from my station without a light. There was another activity where the kids would lead me blindfolded somewhere, and I would lead them back, still blindfolded. I know those woods and those trails. The program staff / storytellers would get a notice to turn off our radios before the first group started the trail. After that, it was dead silent in the dark woods until the first group got there. Since I was far enough, I would usually be 15 to 20 minutes before the first group come in. So one night I'm up there, waiting at this steep cliff, and I hear about 2 feet behind me some kind of kid's voice, which sounds like it's about maybe 10 feet away now, saying my name, clear as day. Now it might not seem very strange to hear a kid saying your name at a camp, but think you're alone, and it's important here that we use nicknames for each other for safety reasons, and not a single child would actually know my first name. The staff did, but they were all at least 50 or 60 yards away, and this was very much a child's voice. It was also coming from what should have been mid-air. It scared me so bad that I had to leave my station and get closer to the next one so I could at least talk to her in the darkness. Over the course of the summer, almost all of the program staff had similar experiences during the night hikes, until finally we scrapped the activity because nobody wanted to be there alone without radios again. Now, let me preface this by explaining that I'm not claiming this was any particular phenomenon. I'm telling you exactly what happened as it happened. No exaggeration or lying of any kind onto what happened. Now, 20 years ago, my older brother and I, who was 19 and 15 at the time respectively, were working on a landscaping job in northern Arizona. So we had gotten off work at the site around 7 PM, hopped into the truck and started the 45-minute commute home. On my way back, there is a dirt road that leads about 20 miles into the desert. It's there mainly to take dirt bikes out or go four-wheeling, etc. But we would use it as it's a good spot to stop and just smoke. So we drive for a couple of miles and park in between these 2 hills that hide the truck and us pretty well. We've done this about 30 times up to that point, but never again. Now we stop and I commence a ritual. He was talking about something, but I wasn't really listening until I heard his voice change saying, "Did you hear that?" We both listen and hear a high-pitched, tiny sound for a split second, then suddenly silence. The desert is actually pretty loud at night. I remembered realizing that the sound is gone suddenly. As we sat there for maybe 5 seconds, my brother gasps and starts the truck and floors it. We go absolutely flying out of there, and I'm asking what happened, but he doesn't say anything. We hit the street, and the lights of a passing car show his face. He's pale and completely wide-eyed and mouth open. I got scared seeing him like this and just wondered what had happened. He finally stopped at a McDonald's parking lot and then we got into town. He starts crying. I pat him on the shoulder and say, "Are you okay?" Then he says, "Remember what, man? We're in the desert for like 5 minutes before you went flying out like a crazy person." He then starts sobbing. He said, It had me, and he couldn't do anything. He said it took me. At this point, I started putting some things together. It was quiet out, no cars. Looked at one of those billboard clocks and saw it was 11:11 p.m. My brother told me something had grabbed me through my passenger side window. He had went for his pistol when he suddenly realized he was frozen and couldn't move, and that he knew if he didn't move and get us out of there that we would die right then. He said he felt it in his heart to be true. He then said that he saw this thing which is very tall, thin, with huge black eyes. He doesn't remember much else about it, just tall and thin with black eyes that are massive. He sat frozen in absolute terror for hours while the thing disappeared with me into the desert. Then, apparently, I suddenly appeared in the truck and he gunned it out of there. Over the years I've spoken to him about it twice and he hates the fact I mention it. Now, I'm not a forest or park ranger, but I hunt. Now, when I say hunt, I don't mean sit down in some tree stand. I mean, I'm the guy going out hunting by walking over the entire park with enough on my back to let me sleep at night, sort of comfortably, but little enough that I'm not dragging my 150 pounds of yummy out of the woods. Alright, so I'm hunting a fairly large forest somewhere in the northeast corridor of the US. It's not uncommon to run into other people at the edges of the woods. It's fairly uncommon to run into people in the middle of the woods, however, even if it's during the hunting season, unless that is that you're on the trails, which I wasn't. It's decently common to run into ruins of buildings from the 1800s. I happened to be hunting a new valley I was pretty sure had a crossing on it to set the view. I'm basically sitting at the top of a very steep shell, which is actually on the side looking down into a valley with a creek running through it. Approaching this plateau, there's a knife edge that runs up and down the ridge, so it's difficult to get here unless you're extremely determined, drunk or foolish, without actually walking up and down the edge. Getting up here creates quite a lot of noise too from stone sliding on stones, which means that I need to sit up here for an hour to let things settle back down after I made my ascent. It's really difficult, and I left my day pack at the bottom under a pine tree and only had a rifle, binoculars, water and an energy bar. I'm up here for about 3 hours, glassing this little area of a stream, looking for something to cross it, and see nothing but squirrels and the birds, and I finally decide to start glassing the opposite hill out of sheer boredom. I am 90% sure I chose a poor spot and wasted an afternoon looking at nothing. Such is hunting. It's got really interesting days, and it's got really boring days, and this is why it's called hunting and not shooting. Now, when I'm screwing around with the binoculars focus, I catch something which almost looks like a person, if they were wearing dark clothes and approximately 4 feet tall. Now, 99% of the time, day hikers just pass by without realizing. I'm here even with the blaze orange requirements, or this person must have just pretended they didn't see me, but you'd be amazed how many times somebody has almost walked straight through my strand. Anyway, this person wasn't moving, which makes me start to think that I'm wrong. I'm just standing there, behind the cover of some low scrub brush and tree branches, and I would have missed it if it wasn't for the colour. I zoom out a bit and realise I'm not looking at a person, but it's actually a collapsed cabin. And I was looking at where the door would be, except it really looks like a person, and cabins aren't blue. I move the zoom back onto the door and I play with the focus for about 5 minutes, and I can't get the person to come back. In fact, the cabin door now has some light from the setting sun visible through the holes in the walls and roof. Whatever 4 foot tall thing I was looking at's moved. Teenagers, right? I thought to myself. Then I realised something else. I can still hear birds and squirrels and all the other things in the woods that would typically go quiet when they notice something, which means they haven't realised I'm here, but also that means that they didn't notice whatever was in the cabin door a short while ago. Now I'm doing my very best to stay as quiet as I can. I would have expected everything in the woods to have gone for cover with a teenager crashing through the brush, but the noise almost made the situation worse. There was stuff moving in the brush now. The problem was the stuff was moving around in the brush. I started to think that maybe it's a trick of the light since the sun is setting, and it was getting to the part of the day when the tree stumps look like this. I knew I would have to move soon and figured I might as well pack it up since I still had to get down off that shell and back to the pine tree where I'd planned to throw a tarp and sleep. At this time, I realised it wasn't dark per se, but it was overcast now. Again, the creepy experience isn't that there's something obviously wrong, it's that everything is so completely normal from what I expected where I was alone. About this time, a fog rolled into the valley, with the combination of overcast weather conditions, sunset, and a ground fog coming up in the wet. There was low valley which had signalled it was time to leave. I checked my safety, put the caps on my glass, and reached up to take down my orange flag. The moment I grabbed the flag, dread come over me. That's the only way I can describe it. The woods went from animals going home to sleep to full on, you're in a bad situation here. The movement had attracted what I can only describe as 1,000 invisible eyes, which all turned in unison to notice me. Ever wonder what a deer in headlights feels like? This is it. Then I hear children. I heard children laughing. Not teenagers, not adults, not women, but full-on 5-year-olds laughing like they caught a firefly. I had hiked in 5 miles from the previous day through the woods and put down 2 more today. When I woke up to get to this spot, I distinctly heard children laughing during what I can only describe as the creepiest moment of my life, knowing I'm completely unoccupied having standed there for at least 4 hours or so. I'm pretty sure my feet only touched the shell 3 times getting down from the knife edge, and so it made a ton of noise in doing so. At this point, I really don't care. I grabbed my pack and flashlight and absolutely full-on brocked it to the next hilltop. I killed my light halfway up the hill, then went to the top of the hill, where I threw down the tarp and unrolled my foam, and there I sat all night watching the hill I come from. Now deep in the backwoods, in the backcountry of Montana, my mum was basically hiking up a mountain to get a crystal dig site. She got separated from her group near the end of the trail and was the first to reach the top of the mountain. As she stood on the trail, she saw what she described as a 4-foot by 6-foot black piece of silk whipping through the trees, hovering about 8 feet from the ground. She was startled but not afraid, and she sensed that the thing was aware of her presence and was moving as quickly as it could away from her. She said it was like an Ewok moving from Star Wars. This occurred in 2017, and ever since my mum has posted countless places online asking has anybody else ever seen this, and nobody else seems to have. So I'm a park warden. I basically spend most of my shifts alone, working 5:30 to 2:30 AM in the Canadian wilderness. We have around 300 or so campsites and a handful of beaches and the infrastructure that goes with them like showers, etc. It just happens that my park is closed for the winter, which are standard in Canada. There can be feet upon feet of snow and blistering cold, so there's no staff in the park from mid-October to early April. Years ago, a man unfortunately decided to end it all by the river on one of the beaches in November, and nobody actually found him until spring melt. This beach is at the farthest northern point of the park and is pretty isolated, but as it has a beach, it requires at least 1 patrol an evening. I was just down in the showers at that Pacific beach around 7 PM on a very overcast day, so no sun to create shadows. I was checking the supplies in the first aid kit and signing off on fire extinguishers. The weather was blah, so there's no campers out or patrols anywhere near the beach, and the parking lot was empty except for my cruiser. All of a sudden, a feeling of intense panic washed over me, and I booked it to the cruiser. I get in and slam the door, and a few breaths in and wait for the feeling to pass. After a minute or two, I get back to business, but this time I'm doing so in my locked car. Now, by this time, I start filling out blinders and work logs, and suddenly, a huge dark shape moves across my driver's side window, and I scream and jump back. My immediate thought was that somebody had been lurking and was about to try and open the door. Sure enough, I open the door and it's empty, not a soul around. You can bet to God that I left any and all future maintenance tasks in that neck of the park to be done by the day shift. I floored it out of there. Now, maybe it's not the scariest or most shocking story that I've shared, but it really rattled me to the core, and I know I saw something that day, and it still shakes me even now. Now, this story really happened over 20 years ago, back when I was 16. During this time, I lived with my mum and stepdad in a remote area 70 miles west of Las Vegas, Nevada. I had gone out to visit my friends, being allowed to drive over on my own for the first time ever. I had a lovely time watching a movie and getting food together until it was time for me to head home. The curfew I was given was 10 PM, but if I was running late for any reason whatsoever, then I had to phone and call my parents, but I would need to find a payphone to do so. That night, wrapped around me and my 71 Chevy pickup, as there was no street lights or any houses for most of the way home. As I pulled up to the first of two stop signs, I could see an older sedan stopped with its hazards on. I pulled up behind it and waited as a man in his 30s to 40s started walking towards me from the driver's side. Even at this point, I didn't have any alarm bells going off. Being in the middle of the Mojave Desert, providing some assistance or anything to stranded people was pretty common. Now, people rapidly go into severe problems by not having enough water when a vehicle breaks down, and not realizing that it's a desert and people die wandering deliriously away from the highway for help. Anyhow, I rolled down my window, and as he come abreast of my door, I could smell the liquor on him. I could then see another man in the passenger seat, as this was before anybody I knew had cell phones, and the nearest payphone was a good 10 minutes drive ahead, and I didn't have a way to call the cops on a drunk driver immediately. The man explained that his car stalled and said, "Can I help him out?" I said to him, "Is it a stick shift?" Which it was, so I said, was he familiar with push starting? He said yes. So I agreed to, gently as I could, push the car with my truck while the engine tries to tick over. For anyone that isn't familiar, this is a way to start a manual car that's having battery or starter issues. I knew my truck would be fine, and I didn't feel like it would be wise to get out and try and push the car physically. Pushing the car worked without a hitch, but here's where things started going south. They get out and thank me. They then invite me to hang out and have some fun with them, but I decline. They pull off to the side of the road and I continue on my way. Only then they begin following. So here I am. It's 09:50. I'm running late because I stopped to help them. Admittedly, I hadn't given myself much leeway from leaving my friends to begin with. Then these drunk, creepy older guys started following me on a road without any man-made lights except for car headlights, and I'm at least 10 minutes from a payphone. I started to think to myself, maybe I'm being paranoid, so I turned down a road that I know gave me a couple turn-offs to either head back to town or loop around to the gas station with a payphone. The car follows behind me. I'm thinking, God, God, God. So I take another turn that only leads to a couple of houses at the end of the road, and they turn behind me. I take another turn to loop back around and head to the station, and they follow again, so at least I know they are following me and not just heading home. At this point, my heart's pounding. I decide to try and lose them. I pull the car to the side of the road, and I see them pull up behind me. I wait as the driver gets out of the car and begins walking towards me. His companion also gets out and starts walking towards me. I wait until they almost get to my tailgate and floor it. My wheels dig into the rock and a puff dirt comes up behind me, which is basically a cloud. With the leadway, I'm heading towards a gas station. The gas station is deserted, but the payphone is showering the lights from the gas pumps. I call home and explain what had happened and why I was running late. My stepdad then said speak to the worker there and try and get directions back. And luckily they gave me some directions and I made it home okay that night. Now, I'm not really a park ranger, but an environmental educator at a nature preserve, so I spend a lot of time outdoors, and it's something I've done often in isolated areas. There's one particular area at the park that I try not to take the group of kids anymore. Now, once in a while we have to go through that trail since it's a shortcut to the kayak launch, and when it's about 95 degrees out, you're ready for anything to make your trip shorter. When I started there, one of the first things that I did was familiarize myself with all the areas of preserve. So I spent a lot of time hiking through all of the trails, even the rarely used ones, since I have to know my way around to navigate groups or go rescue someone if they get lost, which happens. Now, one part of the preserve is an old homestead site of a now abandoned pineapple plantation. It was settled in the 1890s. We don't know much about the family beyond the name and the approximate year they settled there, and the approximate year the homestead was abandoned. Now, this is in southern Florida, and there are thousands of similarly abandoned homestead sites. The early settlers of that area had to be tough as nails. This was pre-railroad area, and the nearest town was about 5 miles through what would have been wilderness at the time with no real roads. So these guys are on their own in a land absolutely bursting with mosquitoes, panthers, bears, and bad water. Water table is high and fresh water can easily be contaminated by salt water nearby. In other words, the early homesteaders were pretty tough because that's the only way they'd survive. There is a narrow trail though that was once a homestead site. Now, on one of my first days, I decided to trek through there. I got about half a mile in when I start to get weird vibes. Now, I've always been relatively sensitive to my surroundings and kind of have a good touch if something's off really. I guess it's something you just develop in time of being out in the woods and whatnot, or isolated areas, but if something's not right, it probably means that your instincts are picking up on something you should pay attention to. Usually this means your brain is picking up on minute movements on the ground that indicate an unfriendly snake may be nearby or another animal that you don't want to confront. While the panthers are nearly gone, we've got aggressive wild boars and bobcats that freely roam. So I stop dead in my tracks and let my mind go quiet, looking around carefully for any warning signs, and there aren't any. And I didn't see any recent tracks, but the bad vibe feeling was still there, and I shrugged it off and kept going. The trail was beginning to get narrower, and the bad vibes kept growing in my gut. I felt I was being watched and followed. Now, this is an isolated area, so the possibility that a person was following me is remote, but possible. I stopped every few meters, but there was no sounds. Actually, none at all, not even birds. I start to sweat and my heart starts to race. One thought that kept echoing in my mind: you are not welcome here. Turn around and go. Well, I thought, just getting jittery from my nerves. I thought I might come to a bend and the trail could stop. Now this is almost what happened when I felt this. My feet would go no further. In my mind, the phrase got louder and louder that I'm not welcome here. I then hear a crash behind me, but when I turn to investigate, there's no one there. No animal, human, nothing. The vegetation was sparse enough that I would have been able to see something, so I turned around and left. I put it down to nerves or me being a wimp or something and sort of forgot about it. About a month later, I'm taking a campground through the kayak launch where our kayaks are. I decided to take the kids through the narrow trail to save us about 10 minutes. We get to the same bend of trail and the kids have gone silent. These are 9-year-olds in summer camp. They are not silent, they're never silent. I look behind me to one kid who looks as though he's scared, terrified. I don't like it here. Why not? He looked at me and said, we shouldn't be here. Now I couldn't turn around at this point, so we hustled to the kayak launch and all was well, but we're a little on edge. I took another group through the trail a week later and again, the kids are silent at that bend in the trail. For that whole summer, whoever I took to the shortcut would go silent and get the bad vibes. Now, I try not to go down that stretch of trail anymore if I can help it. Obviously, this is nothing more than a gut feeling, but it's not a lonely one. It's shared by many others who have no idea about things here. Now, I don't know if it's the spirit of whatever homestead was there, but it's hard to describe and there's definitely something wrong there. I really can't explain this. I only worked as a park ranger for 1 year, but I had an experience I'd like to share. I was on patrol one day, just doing my usual business, not too far away from the ranger station. I'd only been doing the job for about 3 months, so really not too long, and everything was completely normal. Now, usually weird things can happen to me, but never really anything that I couldn't explain. So I felt fairly confident during this time. I had a couple of weird things to deal with, like people that thought they were missing and stuff, but it was basically just hikers that had got lost and I had no issue helping them back. One of the big dangers while you're in a park like this one, a national park, is you can get dehydrated very easily and not really realise it. So it's important that you always have water, and I always had water with me. The only annoying thing that ever really happened was I managed to burst my camel pack and it leaked all down my back. At the time I was terrified because I thought I was bleeding, but this was a different story and not what happened on one particular day. So I'm on my patrol like normal and I feel fairly confident. I haven't done the job for too long, but I seem to be picking up lots of different things, and all of the other rangers at work here are very helpful and friendly. Now I have to patrol a certain area and I get to the first checkpoint. When I get to the checkpoint, I can hear music playing. It sounds very faint, but I check my phone quickly, to which makes me realise that there's nothing playing from my phone. I quickly feel around in my other pockets thinking maybe I've got someone else's phone by mistake, but there's nothing. I then throw the pack on the ground and I realise it's not coming from me, so that raises the next question. Where is it coming from? I remain still for a moment and I can hear an old music box being played. Now it's really weird. It sounds relatively powerful but kind of far away, but I really can't tell the direction. This is really bizarre and like nothing I've ever experienced before. I managed to convince myself that maybe somebody had left one out here and I should try and find it. I managed to eventually coordinate roughly where the sound should be coming from, and it's in the direction I need to go regardless, so I head off. While I'm walking, I realise that something just feels different now. Not like I'm in danger, but almost like I am out of my body, if that makes sense, like I've gone into autopilot. I walk for a good 5 minutes and realise that the sound hasn't stopped. It's really strange. I look up and I can see some kind of strange white light just coming through the tree line up where I think the sound is coming from. It's weird because it kind of looks like sunlight, but too bright and white to be that. And it's actually hurting my eyes. Now it's strange because this seems to move off, completely unnatural to sunlight or other things that should be here. And I knew it was real because it was so bright that it kind of left the trail in my vision as like a green colour. You know, if you ever catch a reflection or laser in your eye, it kind of burns for a few seconds, just like that. So I was certain something was there. So I continue after whatever this was. Now the sound continues and continues, and I don't ever seem to get closer to it. I literally took off half my clothes at one point just to check there wasn't anything on me, because that would be absolutely hilarious if it was on me, but there wasn't anything. And the sound seems to vanish and all is normal. So, I ended up finishing my shift for the rest of the day and heading into the cabins where I was actually sleeping. Now I managed to forget about what I heard that day. However, halfway through the night, I hear that same sound again. Convinced I was dreaming, I rub my eyes, and then the adrenaline hits me and wakes me up. That wasn't coming from my head. There was the sound again. I quickly get up and run to the window, just in time to see some kind of light just off in the porch. It's really bizarre. Nothing should be around now, and we don't have any lights on where we're sleeping. Thinking maybe it's one of the other rangers, I quickly go over to the radio and wake up my buddy in the next one over. I say, "Did you see that?" My buddy's very confused, and from the tone of his voice I can tell that he's just woken up, and I say, "Give me 1 minute," and I go outside. As I go outside, I can't believe what I see. There's a very small, ancient looking music box just sitting on the porch, still playing its song, just like before. Now, confused out of my mind, and probably just being relatively delirious from waking up, I go off to investigate what the light is, which I know is very stupid. I look around and I can't seem to find anything. And then, I can see it again, just illuminating some of the trees, moving at a slow pace, and I follow after it. Now when I sprint after this thing, it doesn't pick up pace, it just seems to be at the exact same speed and distance to me. It's really hard to explain, but it's weird. I thought maybe it was some kind of hiker out of their mind that was playing tricks on me, but every time I seem to get closer to this thing, it just kind of vanishes through the trees, and what's really bizarre is the way it moves. It doesn't make sense how it kind of drifts through the trees. Now my common sense kicks in. The next thing I realise is that I have to turn around and immediately start sprinting in the opposite direction. After about a good 4.5 minutes of running, I make it back and my other ranger friend is there with a coffee. He says, "What were you doing?" I explain what happened and he looks at me very confused. I then point off in the distance and he goes very pale. I say, "What's wrong?" and he says, "Do you see that light?" I say, "Yeah, I just chased it." He said, "I've seen this before," and he quickly goes inside and tells me to follow. He slams the door behind and turns on all the lights in his cabin. He then tells me that he's seen this light before, and he says to me, "Did you hear the music?" At this point, the penny dropped and I feel very scared. I say, "Yeah, I did, that's why I investigated. I thought you put the music box out there." He then looks at me and says, "No, of course I didn't, I was asleep." And now the fear takes over. He then tells me that he's seen the exact same thing 2 or 3 times before over the last 6 months and he still has no idea what it was. We then realise that the music box should still be outside, and we quickly open the door and head out again to investigate. We look to the exact spot where it was before, and it's not there. I say, no, this can't be possible, it was literally right there on the porch. And My friend looks at me and says, "Don't worry." I start frantically looking around and I can't find it anywhere, and my friend can't either. We ended up staying up for another 2 hours just trying to find this box thing, but we can't find it, and there's no more music. We both looked off into the woods and we can't see any more light now. We decided that we should just stay in one person's cabin for safety reasons, and we start sharing ideas of what this thing could have been. I'd hate to admit it, but I kind of think it was some kind of alien, I tell my friend, and he's leaning more towards the fact it could be something more normal, but it doesn't make sense. There's no reason that it should have been so bright, or bright enough to have hurt my eyes, but why would it have been playing the music box? It doesn't really make sense. Neither of us can account for where that music box gone, and we decided it couldn't have possibly been anybody else because we're the only guys out here, and of course we would have seen or heard them, but how could anybody be this far out? How would they have possibly known their way around the tall trees? And how could they have moved so quickly without disturbing any of the ground? That's the weirdest part for me. I don't know whether somebody or a group of people followed me out there and they had some kind of really bright lantern or something, but it just doesn't make sense to me. The entire situation was just off, and that night is actually what made me change careers. Mind you, I couldn't do it as quick as I wanted. I still had about another 10 months left in the tank before I was able to actually leave, but I requested to leave that area and thankfully it was granted. I never did go back to those cabins, and I never really spoke to that friend much afterwards, so I don't know what else happened. One thing I do know is that there's something out there in those woods that shouldn't be there, and for as long as I live, I'm never gonna forget that song and that light that burnt my eyes. About 8 PM last night, I was walking with a friend of mine, Sally, about a mile to the closest cafe. We're both girls in our late 20s, neither of us drive. Sally didn't have her Opal card, which is the Australian version of an Oyster card. So walking, that's our only option. It's summer over here, so it was fairly well lit, and we're both walking down the main roads and not too concerned, when we finally arrive at this cafe and sit down. Now I was paying with my credit card, and sure enough, it was cash only. Sally was on the phone when I got back from the counter, so I just gestured her to stay put and guard while I went to get the cash out. This is my home suburb, so I know there's ATMs around, and my best bet is a gas station about a block away. Now I'm doing a light jog so I don't keep Sally waiting, when a balding sweaty guy, probably in his late 40s with a tank top and no shoes, comes pacing behind me as I pass the corner of the block. He walked for about 100 meters. I really don't think much of it. The gas station was the next building along, and it seemed like he'd just come out of a nice suburban house along the street, and it's not the witching hour, so I just assume he's going to the gas station as I am. He didn't even cross my mind as I entered this tiny convenience store, nor did he follow me in. In my peripheral vision, I saw him walk past the door and out of sight. I look around for an ATM that they have inside sometimes. No luck. So I go up to this man in his late 30s, at the desk, reluctantly asking if they do a cash out. He smiles and says of course, saying, "Who's with you?" I have no idea who he's talking about at first, but he then points to the man from earlier, pacing around outside the store. Keep in mind, he didn't look at all menacing. He wasn't going back and forth just outside the door. He was just drifting in space outside, from the pavement to the gas pumps, to the storefront seemingly aimlessly. Maybe he's on drugs. I tell the clerk no, not thinking much of it, and he says, "He was staring at you before, and I thought maybe he's your father." I laugh it off. I wasn't concerned at all. He was still ambling around outside. I couldn't imagine him having a fixed gaze on anything. I thank the clerk for the cash, but before I turn away he says, "Just wait and see if he leaves." We wait for a few minutes in silence, and the guy begins to pace back and forth directly against the front wall of the store, looking straight ahead, but never in. It still looks like the man was just a drug addict and seemed harmless. Not once did I catch his gaze, so I figure it's safe to slip out, where it's starting to become dusk and kind of bright. Sally was texting me, "Where are you?" I thank the guy at the desk again for his concern, assure him that I don't know the guy and am not involved in some weird scheme to rob the store. The clerk asks if I want him to walk out with me. I say that it should be alright, and begin walking away from the block. As I leave the store though, the drifting man stops pacing and makes a beeline for me from the other end of the building. I seriously don't think much of the guy at all up until this point, but now he's powering towards me. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I start to power walk so he doesn't think I'm actively trying to escape him. Still trying to convince myself that I'm being paranoid and should be more casual. I don't look behind me to see how close he is. I reach the pavement on the other side of the gas pumps when I hear the clerk outside. He's yelling at me, "Run!" I make a break for it, looking over my shoulder. He grabbed the man from behind. The balding man isn't even glancing behind him or trying to escape. He's literally just staring at me, running away with this death stare. I kept running until I crossed the road and then turned around, but still standing. The clerk is holding on to the man. The clerk and I are just looking at each other in pure bewilderment, not really knowing what to do. He makes a hand gesture to go and I wave thanks. I go back to Sally and we rush home a complete different way. It's a really weird experience. I'm just thankful that the gas station worker was so kind and caring. When I was younger, I worked at a gas station as an attendant. I was really hoping to do a good job to impress my supervisors, but I had a few things go wrong what made him lose faith in me. One of the scariest moments was a crazy local drove down by the station, hid in the bushes, and literally started shooting the pumps. My boss is convinced he's aiming for me, but it seemed like I was an unintended target, that he was actually trying to shoot the supplies. Paint cans and oil cans suffer the most damage. I can't figure out why on earth he was trying to do this. He is a real nutcase. I was lucky that the whole thing didn't blow up that day. Freaking crazy. This happened about 6 months ago, and it's really been bugging me since. This will be long, but I must set the scene. So my family has a cabin we've had since the 60s, and I've been going there my entire life throughout the years. It's nestled in a little town of less than 2,000, surrounded with vast forest and farmland. You see cows everywhere and stray dogs that let you stroke them. You'll maybe see 30 people in a day if you go into the little town and shops around. Definition of a small country town for sure. Since I spent my entire life there, I know pretty much everyone. all my family knows everyone. Men dressed in western clothes with big jeans and old flannel shirts and belts with big buckles. Women dressed in jeans and tank tops with country factory logos on them. They're all nice enough and keep to themselves. So I'm driving up there one night to meet my parents since they had been gone the night previously to open the cabin for spring. My boyfriend has also flown in so he can finally meet my family up there. I'd been driving until it got dark. About a 2-hour and 10-minute drive from my house, and he had been taken over driving from around 10. There's a little national park close by, about 15 miles of total land. Since I'd fallen asleep and couldn't give directions, he decided to log the address into the GPS. It took him through the back way through the park that I never drive through. So when he woke me up to ask me where the next turn is since the GPS said he couldn't go either way, it took me a minute to figure out where the hell are we. There were no lights anywhere, and we're the only car for about 15 miles. There's long forest with tall giant trees on either side of the road, with a lonely deer or two in the woods to keep us company. I mentioned switching drivers because I remembered that road, which would lead directly into the intersection that would go through a small community up to the mountain by my cabin. But it was prime. Leave a tow baby on the side of the road and kidnap someone when they check it out territory. It was dark enough that the forest was thick enough that we joked some cult members are probably there. Hell, maybe they are. Needless to say, we decided stopping isn't a good idea. We eventually passed through a small clearing/intersection with a dinky concrete building on the side of the road with one light on, and a car pulled in the slanted gravel ground. My boyfriend drives forward. He then sees that there's 2 people there. My gut immediately twisted, and I start to feel sick. Sick enough to feel ice cold sweat running through my hair, and my veins now are pumping through to my stomach. You never see people at night here, and it's 2 teen boys in fact, wearing nice clothes. Nike shorts and obnoxiously coloured sport workout clothing, aka very out of place, like something's wrong. They see us coming and walk away from what appears to be an old beat up car, probably from the 1960s, and it's important to note that this was completely gone of any paint and rusting. They smile at us and wave. I don't have a clue who these people are, and I'm starting to hear noises around us. I knew a gas station was right up the road from us. They could have just walked from there, but there's no lights up the road and no reason to be here. The building around us is abandoned, but there's a light on the wall. I'm starting to think these are in on it. They walk out onto the road, almost blocking my boyfriend from going forward, who had to slow down continuously not to hit them. Suddenly the light goes out in the building. They constantly wave their arms and smile at us, saying something that we can't hear. We think about stopping but decide it's stupid to. My boyfriend quickly drove around them, slamming on the gas, trying to calm me down since the whole scene scares the life out of me. Images of getting out of the car and something stranger or worse happening flew through my head. I look behind us and they're suddenly angry, staring at us, not moving an inch, and the light flickers on in the background in the building. Who are those kids? Why were they wearing city clothes? They looked too young to be driving. I know it wasn't their car. And who was in the building? We finally made it out and found the intersection we wanted that led to the familiar gas station and he didn't hesitate when I said I need to drive next. About 10 or so minutes later, we get to the cabin and explain what happened, and my parents are terrified. God knows what would have happened if we had stopped and actually got out. I don't like to think of it. A little over a year ago, I worked at a gas station. It was one of those 24/7 ones with a mini mart inside of it, and I worked the evening shift. Now, I saw and dealt with a lot of messed up things in that store, which just led me to roll my eyes when people were doing or saying creepy stuff. Hell, if I had $1 for every time I was threatened with death, I'd be retired now. So one night, I was out in the store restocking shelves when one of the regulars came in and started talking to me. He was a full-blown druggie. He would have been in his 50s. And he was tweaking while sitting on me. By this point, I'm used to weird stuff and ignore it. He said some messed up things to me though. Something about what he wanted to do with me. I zoned in and out of what he was saying. It wasn't uncommon for him to ramble about weird acts and other gross things. I tell him that I have to get back behind the counter because my co-worker needs me to make coffee for a customer. He was a bit irritated but said that he would talk to me later and left the shop. After making coffee, I had to restock drinks, but the day team hadn't emptied the trolleys of boxes, so I took out the boxes to the big bin. The bin is located on another side of the store, but there's no cameras, so people inside the store can't see you there. That used to make me nervous, but I had been there longer than some of the people who had come through, and was used to the environment. As I was throwing the boxes in the bin, the tweaking guy from before comes up to me, grabs my arm. I tried to play it off like he's goofing around and laugh and say something like, "Hey, I know you like me, but you can't do that. My husband's gonna get mad." Sounds like I wasn't trying much, but with people like him, it was best to remain friendly. The last time someone was more firm, he got knocked out by a right hook, and I was a lucky girl who got to witness it and call the police. He then gets angry and says, "I told you I was gonna have my way with you." Now, I've stopped smiling and I'm scared. He shoves me against the bin and goes to unbuckle his belt when glass smashed. One of my favourite customers was across the road at a pub and saw him go straight for me, knowing his reputation, knowing something bad was happening. And when he saw what was going on, he smashes a bottle over his head. Cops were called and I don't see him again. As for the guy who saved me, I'd given him free coffee for a month. I refused outright to take out the boxes now. I'm just glad I got off okay and was saved that day. Probably the weirdest thing that happened to me in my life was when I was driving to a gas station one night. Now, I was on a very long road trip at the time, heading from college to home. I literally had to drive hundreds of miles, and I'm in the middle of the backwoods, not seeing cars or buildings for miles. I'm starting to get worried because of how low my gas is running. I'm really thinking that I'm gonna have to tent it out here in the middle of the night or something, the last thing that I want to be doing. And hey, did I forget to mention that I'm terrified of the woods? Just as I'm thinking this, I decide to switch on the radio to try and calm my nerves. Even worse, they're playing ABBA songs. I really don't like ABBA songs, and I continue going. Luckily for me though, I've got the moonlight to help guide me. even though that my headlights aren't doing much to penetrate the woods. We now entering the dangerously low gas territory, and I'm worried, but lo and behold, what do I see? An old gas station up ahead. Ah, oh, thank God, I think to myself. I was getting worried there. I pull into the gas station and stop for a second before getting out. I have a really weird feeling. I know it's quiet where I'm driving, but it's just far too quiet up here. I look around and don't see anyone. There's no one near the counter either, and it looks abandoned almost. I then hear a voice on the intercom. Yeah, just go pump your gas, we'll help you in a minute. In a horrible raspy old voice. Now the very second that I go to unlock my door, all of the lights shut off. I know it's not a power outage either, but I can still hear the sounds of the intercom not being turned off fully. Needless to say, I turn my engine key. I'm shaking so much I can't even put it into gear. Not to worry, adrenaline takes over, and I speed up to 60 like I've never drove so quick in my life, and don't bother looking back. As I've been driving for about half a minute, I can see lights in the distance behind me. I'm scared to look. Turns out, all of the lights are on again in the gas station. I have no idea what happened that day, or what they were planning to do with me. Things I do know for a fact though is that they purposely turned off the lights and were purposely waiting for someone to come there. And I also know that there was no help or way to find me if anything happened out there.